Beneath layers of earth, behind locked doors, and hidden in ancient ruins, lie fragments of a past we were never meant to find. These are not just forgotten moments in time. They are erased chapters, deliberately buried, their truth too dangerous, too strange, or too powerful to survive the march of history. From deserts that whisper of vanished empires, to mountain stones carved with symbols no one can read, to ruins in Palestine whose foundations predate the histories we're taught. There are questions here that defy explanation. How did entire civilizations rise and fall without leaving a trace? Who were the silent architects of megaliths larger than modern cranes could lift? And why do so many ancient sites share the same mathematical precision, the same celestial alignments, even though they're separated by oceans and centuries? The deeper we look, the more the past begins to feel wrong, incomplete, altered. This is not myth. This is not fiction. This is real history. Lost, but not forgotten. And tonight, we're going to uncover it. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in to the chilling mysteries of a world that once was, and may still be. High in the mountains of eastern Anatolia, where the winds carve secrets into the ridges and the earth feels older than memory, stand the silent ruins of a forgotten kingdom. The air here is thin, dry, and sharp, and the sun casts long, solemn shadows over stone walls that have not seen a ruler in nearly 3 millennia. The Kingdom of Urartu, carved into cliffs, fortified by Cyclopean masonry, and cloaked in silence, waits quietly among the hills, its name barely a whisper in modern history books. Once stretching across what is now eastern Turkey, northwestern Iran, Armenia, and parts of Palestine, Urartu rose in the 9th century BC and held its ground for nearly 3 centuries. It was a powerful independent kingdom, contemporary with Assyria, Babylon, and Persia, yet somehow it has remained shrouded in obscurity. While its neighbors left behind libraries of clay tablets, religious epics, and royal annals, Urartu speaks only in fragments, inscriptions etched in stone, ruined fortresses perched atop remote plateaus, and artifacts buried beneath volcanic soil. The Urartians called themselves the Biainili, and their capital, Tushpa, stood on the banks of Lake Van, a sapphire expanse surrounded by mountains, where ancient harbors now lie submerged beneath the waterline. Their language, though written in cuneiform, is unrelated to the great Semitic or Indo-European tongues of the time. It shares roots instead with Hurrian, an even more ancient and poorly understood language. The mysteries begin here, with a language few can decipher, and a people who appear suddenly, fully formed, in the historical record. But where did they come from? Archaeologists have long struggled to define Urartu's origins. Some argue it was born from the ashes of the Hurrian kingdoms that preceded it, rising as a regional power after the collapse of the Hittites. Others suggest its culture emerged independently, perhaps as a defensive reaction to Assyrian aggression. And yet, something doesn't quite add up. The scale of their engineering, the sophistication of their metallurgy, and the precision of their water management systems suggest a level of knowledge not easily attributed to a fledgling society. Their metallurgy, in particular, has drawn attention. Urartian bronze work is among the finest of the ancient world, refined, intricate, and widespread. Temples and palaces were clad in bronze-plated doors. Weapons were produced in standardized forms with inscriptions identifying royal workshops. And yet, some of these bronze items show signs of techniques thought to be centuries ahead of their time. Smelting practices, alloy compositions, even tools resembling iron long before the Iron Age took hold in neighboring regions. Is it possible they inherited lost knowledge? If so, from whom? Urartu's architecture offers more clues and more puzzles. Their fortresses were not just military outposts. Many were built on steep rock outcrops with complex, multi-tiered layouts, stone foundations cut with geometric precision, underground cisterns capable of storing water year-round. One such fortress, at Altintepe, features frescoes and halls that rival the artistic sensibilities of more famous civilizations. And yet, these sites were abandoned almost as mysteriously as they were built. Some scholars have pointed to Urartu's unique hydraulic engineering as a mark of their sophistication. Canals stretching for miles across uneven terrain, carved directly into the rock. These aqueducts brought glacial water to dry regions, sustaining agriculture and life in otherwise barren zones. In the arid Anatolian highlands, such technology was more than a convenience. It was survival. But who taught the Urartians how to build these? There are no blueprints, no earlier models, just finished works appearing suddenly, as though the knowledge arrived with them. And then there are the symbols. Among the many inscriptions, some repeat not royal decrees or war records, but cryptic signs carved in places no eyes were meant to see, hidden behind stairwells, beneath cistern lids, or deep inside storage chambers. Some resemble stars. Others seem like abstract geometric puzzles. Their meanings remain unknown. Are they religious, protective spells, or something else? Fringe researchers have speculated that Urartu might have been in contact with older, even lost civilizations, perhaps the same cultures linked to the mythic Mount Ararat, which looms not far from the heart of the Urartian realm. Legends long associated with Ararat speak of gods, floods, and sacred knowledge. Could Urartu have preserved some echo of that ancient memory? A few even propose that the kingdom was a kind of transitional culture, preserving knowledge from an earlier era before passing it on to the Persians or Medes. The theory is controversial, but not impossible. After all, when Urartu fell in the 6th century BC, it left behind no clear successor. Its people, its tongue, and its symbols vanished from history. Within a few generations, even its name was forgotten. But why? The Assyrians, long their enemies, collapsed around the same time. The Medes and then the Persians rose in the vacuum. Perhaps Urartu was simply absorbed, assimilated into a new imperial order. But the rapidity of its disappearance continues to puzzle historians. No dramatic war, no evidence of mass destruction, just a slow fading away, fortresses left to crumble, scripts left unfinished. Even now, much of what we know about Urartu comes from its enemies. The Assyrian kings left detailed records of their campaigns into the mountains, portraying the Urartians as fierce but noble adversaries. It's a rare tone of respect in a genre usually reserved for boasting and blood. That alone raises questions. What kind of power did Urartu truly wield? What secrets did it protect in its highland temples and mountain halls? The waters are rising in Lake Van. Each year they inch higher, covering more of the ancient world beneath their depths. Some say entire structures still lie there. Submerged temples, inscriptions untouched by sunlight in over 2,000 years. Perhaps the answers we seek have simply slipped beneath the waves, waiting for someone to ask the right question. And so, we continue, stone by stone, question by question, into the long shadow of Urartu, Oxford. A city steeped in centuries of learning, where stone towers rise like solemn sentinels over winding medieval streets. The air carries the scent of rain-drenched stone and the quiet hum of scholarly life. Today, it is known for one of the world's most prestigious universities, a beacon of enlightenment. But beneath the cobbled paths and ancient halls, there is a shadow, a story rarely spoken of, even within Oxford's own archives. It was summer, 1577. The Assize court had convened at Oxford Castle, an imposing Norman fortress that loomed over the city with thick gray walls and a dark, echoing keep. Crowds gathered as they always did, eager to watch the procession of judges in their robes, to hear justice rendered upon the accused. Among them that day, a man named Roland Jenks, a Catholic bookseller, accused of speaking seditious words against the Crown and the Church of England. His trial was not unusual for its time. The Elizabethan era was marked by religious tension, paranoia, and the tightening grip of the Protestant Reformation. But what followed was anything but ordinary. Shortly after the trial concluded, death swept through the courtroom. Within just a few days, over 300 people connected to the trial were dead. Jurors, lawyers, court officials, even spectators. They died not of visible wounds, but of sudden, violent illness. Symptoms reportedly included high fever, convulsions, and blackened tongues. The phenomenon became known as the Black Assize, a phrase as chilling as the event itself. What could have caused such a targeted and devastating outbreak? Mainstream historians often point to the conditions of the court itself. Overcrowding, poor ventilation, the presence of prisoners held in the damp, unsanitary cells of Oxford Castle. Typhus, also known as jail fever, is one of the more accepted theories. Spread by lice, it could have easily taken hold in the fetid environment of an overcrowded courtroom packed with people and prisoners. And yet, there are problems with this explanation. Typhus outbreaks do not typically kill with such speed or such selectivity. Reports indicate that the majority of deaths were among those present during Jenks's trial, not in the surrounding city. Clerks died, guards died, magistrates died, but the prisoners and jailers, the likely carriers, did not perish in the same numbers, nor did the public at large. The sickness came and went with eerie precision. Some survivors of the time were convinced that this was no ordinary plague, but something darker. According to 16th century chronicler Holinshed, the event may have been the result of a curse. He claimed that Roland Jenks had muttered strange words during his trial, and that shortly thereafter, those in the court began to fall ill. A curse? Or perhaps something more deliberate. The underground chambers of Oxford Castle still exist today. Dark, damp, and cold, they tell their own stories. Historians have noted that some prisoners were political enemies or religious dissenters. The late 16th century was a time of covert warfare between Protestant England and Catholic Europe. Could there have been poisons introduced intentionally? Secret agents? Or early forms of biological warfare? Fringe researchers have proposed even stranger theories. Some believe that what occurred in that courtroom was not natural at all, but alchemical, that a secret rite or invocation was triggered during the trial, either by Jenks or by someone else present. The Renaissance was not only an age of religious turmoil, but also of magical experimentation. Oxford, for all its academic polish, was not immune to occult interests. The writings of John Dee, mathematician, astrologer, advisor to Queen Elizabeth, circulated among intellectuals of the time. Could the court have unknowingly become the center of some arcane experiment? And then there are the whispers about ley lines, the idea that ancient energy paths crisscross the land, intersecting at key points. Some claim that Oxford lies on one such line, and that events like the Black Assize are symptoms of disturbances along these forgotten forces. It is a theory without scientific basis, but one that lingers in the lore of places steeped in ancient history. Today, tourists walk the halls of Oxford Castle Unlocked, a heritage site offering tours and historical reenactments. Few realize that they tread on ground where over 300 people once died, inexplicably. No memorial marks their passing. No plaque tells the story in full. Why does such a significant and mysterious event remain so little known? Is it because it does not fit comfortably within our narratives of progress and reason? Because it unsettles the perception of a time we think we understand? Or simply because the truth, whatever it was buried along with the victims, beneath the stone floors of a castle no longer used for trials? Roland Jenks was released eventually. He lived on, quietly, never tried again. But those who sought to judge him were already gone. The records are incomplete. The causes remain disputed. And still, centuries later, the air inside the old courtroom feels heavy, as if the stones themselves remember something the documents do not. What really happened during the Black Assize of Oxford? And what, if anything, still lingers in the silence left behind? In the narrow streets of Cologne, where the mist rolls low over the Rhine and the bells of ancient cathedrals toll through the fog, there is a quiet that feels older than stone. Travelers here walk cobbled paths that have echoed with footsteps for over 1,000 years. But in the summer of 1212, these streets bore witness to something strange, something that history struggles to explain even today. They say it began with a boy, a shepherd, no older than 12 or 13, who claimed he'd received a divine message to gather the children of Europe and march, unarmed and pure of heart, to reclaim the Holy Land. The details are scattered, the names uncertain. Some call him Nicholas. Others speak of a boy named Stephen in France who experienced visions and miracles. The stories differ in geography, in origin, and in outcome, but the core remains the same. Thousands of children, some say as many as 30,000, left their homes behind, drawn not by war or conquest, but by faith. What drove these children to leave their families and journey across mountains, forests, and seas? They came from Germany, from France, from rural hamlets and bustling towns alike. Some were orphans. Others fled against the wishes of their parents. Most were poor. They carried few belongings. They were unarmed, and yet they believed, fiercely, that the sea would part for them, that their innocence alone could succeed where armies had failed. But the sea did not part, nor did they reach Jerusalem. The Children's Crusade is one of the most haunting and poorly understood movements in medieval history. Chroniclers of the 13th century offer only fragments, some sympathetic, others skeptical. Some describe miracles along the way, food appearing in barren landscapes, wolves turning away from sleeping camps. Others recount betrayal, suffering, and disappearance. What happened to the children? Some records claim that many turned back, weakened by hunger and exhaustion, never making it past the Alps. Others were said to have been sold into slavery, tricked by merchants who offered them passage across the Mediterranean and instead delivered them to markets in North Africa. A few were absorbed into monastic communities, their crusade ending in silence behind cloistered walls. But thousands were never accounted for at all. There is no definitive list of names, no complete tally of survivors or casualties, only the stories that ripple through time, each slightly distorted, each colored by the fears and hopes of the age. What makes the Children's Crusade so chilling is not just the tragedy, it's the uncertainty. Historians still debate whether it happened as described. Was it truly a mass movement of children, or a medieval exaggeration of scattered pilgrimages woven into legend by monastic scribes? The absence of centralized records makes both possibilities viable. Still, the question remains: if the event was fabricated or exaggerated, why? Why invent a tale of innocence marching into the jaws of the unknown? Some believe the story served as a cautionary tale, warning against the dangers of uncontrolled religious zeal or the seductive pull of false prophecy. Others suggest it reflects the era's deep yearning for purity in a world marred by violent crusades and political betrayal. After the failed Fourth Crusade, where Christian knights attacked Constantinople instead of reclaiming Palestine. The idea of a purer crusade, led by children untainted by greed, may have appealed to a culture in spiritual crisis. And yet, whispers persist that the movement was real, and far stranger than we imagine. Fringe theories, drawing on obscure documents and reinterpretations of medieval sources, suggest that the Children's Crusade may not have been a crusade at all. Some propose it was an early peasant uprising, disguised as a religious mission to avoid persecution. Others claim that the children were led by secretive religious sects with esoteric beliefs, groups that saw in them a new spiritual order, or even vessels for divine intervention. A more unsettling theory suggests the involvement of shadowy figures who used the children for unknown purposes. Whether trafficking, religious rituals, or something more sinister, these ideas remain on the margins of scholarly discourse. But they linger in the public imagination because the facts are so few and the silence so loud. One of the most enduring mysteries is what happened at the port of Marseille. It's said that 2 merchants offered free passage to the Holy Land. 7 ships set sail, loaded with hopeful pilgrims. But none reached their destination. Later reports say that 5 of the ships were lost at sea. The other 2, diverted to the African coast, allegedly sold the children into slavery. There are no known shipwrecks, no cargo logs, no survivor testimonies that can be fully verified. Just the story, just the silence. And so, the Children's Crusade remains suspended in the strange twilight between myth and history, a story passed down for centuries, shaped by faith, sorrow, and unanswered questions. What truly happened to those children? Were they victims of a cruel age, swept up in a vision they could not understand? Or was something else at work? Something we still fail to see, hidden beneath the layers of time, lost among forgotten names and vanished footsteps. In a world where children once believed they could change the course of history, how much do we really know about what they left behind? In the heart of Alsace, nestled along the banks of the Rhine River, the old streets of Strasbourg wind through half-timbered houses and quiet stone churches. Today, it's a place of charm and tradition. But in the summer of 1518, these streets bore witness to a spectacle so bizarre, so deeply unsettling, that it still defies explanation. It began without warning. One hot July morning, a woman stepped into the street and began to dance. Her name, we are told, was Frau Trophea. There was no music, no festival, just movement. Wild, rhythmic, ceaseless. Hours passed. She did not stop. By nightfall, she was still dancing. Within days, dozens more had joined her. Men, women, even children. They moved through the squares, twisting, spinning, collapsing from exhaustion, only to rise again as if compelled by something beyond their control. Within a week, the number had swelled to over 100. Eyewitnesses reported groans of pain, bloodied feet, and cries for help. Even as the dancing continued, the city leaders were baffled. Physicians were summoned. In an age shaped by both spiritual fear and emerging science, the response was peculiar. They believed the dancers were afflicted by hot blood, an imbalance of the humors, and that the only cure was to dance it out. They cleared space in the guild halls and markets, hired musicians, and even constructed a wooden stage. But rather than calm the afflicted, the music only seemed to feed the frenzy. Some danced until their bodies gave out, until they collapsed from exhaustion, heart attack, or stroke. Reports from the time suggest that dozens, possibly even hundreds, may have died. What was happening in Strasbourg? Historians and medical experts have grappled with this question for centuries. Some of the more conventional theories point to mass hysteria, a form of psychogenic illness triggered by extreme stress. In 1518, Strasbourg was reeling from famine, disease, and political turmoil. Life was uncertain, brutal. In such a climate, the mind may fracture in strange ways. The dancing, in this view, becomes a kind of collective release, an unconscious revolt against fear, hunger, and suffering. But even mass hysteria struggles to explain the scale and duration of what occurred. Other researchers have pointed to ergot poisoning, caused by a mold that grows on damp rye and produces hallucinogenic alkaloids similar to LSD. Consuming infected bread could trigger convulsions, hallucinations, and strange behavior. It's a tempting explanation, one that aligns with Strasbourg's diet and climate at the time, but ergotism usually brings spasms and seizures, not coordinated rhythmic dancing, and it typically affects individuals, not entire crowds. Still, the theory remains on the table, one piece of a puzzle that refuses to come together. Then there are the religious and supernatural interpretations. In the deeply Catholic atmosphere of the 16th century, many saw the dancing plague as divine punishment, or demonic possession. Local lore spoke of Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers and epileptics, believed to curse those who angered him with uncontrollable movement. Some afflicted were taken to shrines dedicated to the saint, hoping for a miracle. A few were cured, or so the stories say, but the mystery endured. Even more curious is the fact that Strasbourg was not alone. Episodes of compulsive dancing had occurred before, and would happen again, across the Rhine Valley and beyond. In 1237, a group of children was said to have danced for miles through Erfurt and into the town of Arnstadt. In 1374, hundreds of people danced wildly through the streets of Aachen, in what some have described as a proto-outbreak of the same phenomenon. Was there something ancient at work here? Something cyclical? Some fringe theorists suggest a forgotten ritual at the root of it all, an echo of pre-Christian ceremonies once held to mark the changing seasons, now misinterpreted or corrupted by time. Others propose that the behavior might have been triggered by sound, subsonic frequencies, or environmental resonance we do not fully understand. The human brain, they argue, is more sensitive than we realize, and the right conditions, stress, fear, rhythm, can produce altered states that spread like wildfire. Still others whisper of darker forces, of ancient energy buried beneath the city, of places where the veil between worlds is thin, of a kind of madness that does not come from within, but from without. We may never know. Strasbourg's city records preserve the facts as best they can, the dates, the names, the accounts of the dead. But beyond the parchment, what remains is feeling, a lingering sense of dread, the unsettling idea that, under the right conditions, something like this could happen again. What drives a person to dance until death? Is it something primal within us? Some forgotten instinct? Some dormant memory waiting for release? Or was it something else entirely? Something that slipped past our defenses in a moment of weakness, taking hold of 100 minds with a single invisible touch. The streets of Strasbourg are quiet now, but walk them in the early morning fog, when the bells are distant and the city is still, and the silence feels heavy, as if the stones themselves remember a rhythm that once shook the ground. And if the rhythm returns, who among us will be the first to move? Where the great rivers of Eastern Europe flow into the Caspian Sea, where the steppe meets the mountains and the horizon stretches wide and unbroken, there once stood a kingdom that has all but vanished from collective memory. Today, that land, modern-day southern Russia and western Kazakhstan, feels remote and windswept, dotted with small villages and endless plains. But more than 1,000 years ago, it was the heart of an empire both powerful and perplexing. The Khazar Empire, neither fully Eastern nor fully Western, not Slavic, Turkic, or Semitic, but a blend of all three. The Khazars rose to power in the 7th century AD. Their empire controlled vast trade routes between the Byzantine world, the Islamic Caliphate, and the emerging states of Eastern Europe. Gold, silver, silk, spices. all passed through Khazar hands. They commanded respect and fear. And yet, despite their dominance, the Khazars left behind almost nothing. No great stone monuments, no epic literature, no surviving language in everyday use. Just scattered fragments, hints, whispers, and perhaps most curious of all is their faith. By the mid-8th century, historical accounts suggest that the Khazar elite converted to Judaism. In an age dominated by Christian emperors and Muslim caliphs, the decision was extraordinary, not only politically, but spiritually, culturally, and symbolically. What prompted an entire royal court, possibly even the wider nobility, to embrace a religion that had no empire of its own? Most sources on this event come from outsiders: Byzantine chroniclers, Arab historians, even Jewish traders passing through. According to the Khazar correspondence, a letter allegedly written by King Joseph of the Khazars to a Jewish dignitary in Cordoba, the conversion was the result of a theological debate. Representatives of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism were brought before the Khazar king, who questioned them carefully, and in the end, chose the path of the Hebrews. But was it truly a spiritual awakening, or something else? Some scholars argue it was a political calculation, an effort to remain independent in a world increasingly divided between cross and crescent. By adopting Judaism, the Khazars positioned themselves outside the influence of both the Byzantine Empire and the Abbasid Caliphate. In this light, the conversion was a shield, a way to remain neutral, autonomous, and sovereign. Others question whether the conversion ever took place on a broad scale at all. Was it merely the ruling class? Was it symbolic rather than actual? Did the Khazar people, largely nomadic and tribal, adopt the religion of their kings? The archaeological record offers few answers. Hebrew inscriptions have been found, yes, but rarely and often without context. No synagogues have been unearthed, no Torah scrolls preserved, and then, as quickly as they rose, the Khazars disappeared. By the 10th century, the empire began to fragment. Pressured from the north by the Rus, from the south by Muslim powers, the Khazar state crumbled. Cities were abandoned, records lost, alliances severed. By the time the Mongols arrived in the 13th century, the Khazars were already a shadow, absorbed into other tribes, scattered, forgotten, but the mystery did not end. In later centuries, echoes of the Khazars surfaced in strange and unexpected places. Some Jewish communities in Eastern Europe, particularly among the Ashkenazim, began to speculate about Khazar ancestry. The idea that modern Jewish populations in parts of Eastern Europe might trace their roots not only to Palestine, but also to the Khazar nobility, took hold in certain circles, first as curiosity, then as theory, and eventually as political tool. Mainstream historians have long debated this possibility. Genetic studies show mixed results, some suggesting minor Central Asian input among Eastern European Jews, others dismissing any significant connection. Still, the question lingers. Who were the Khazars? What became of them? Did their identity dissolve entirely? Or did it survive, hidden within the folds of history? Fringe theories, often unsupported but persistent, take the mystery further. Some claim the Khazars never disappeared at all, that their elite fled westward, reshaping themselves as noble families in the Balkans, in Hungary, even in the Holy Roman Empire. Others believe that remnants of the Khazars continued to influence regional politics for centuries, operating behind other banners, their name lost but their legacy intact. And some go further still, proposing conspiracies that veer into dangerous and discredited territory. These ideas, often politically motivated, attempt to rewrite the lineage of entire populations, weaponizing identity for ideological ends. It's a stark reminder that history, especially lost history, is fragile and easily distorted when facts are few. But beneath all the speculation, a quieter question remains. Why was the Khazar Empire so thoroughly erased? For a kingdom that stood at the crossroads of continents, whose rulers engaged with the great powers of their time, whose religious transformation was unprecedented. Why do we know so little? Why have so few remnants survived? Was it simply the fate of a nomadic people, whose wealth was in trade rather than temples? Or was their erasure more deliberate? An empire undone not just by enemies, but by time itself. In the windswept steppe, you can still find scattered ruins, mounds overgrown with grass, ancient stone walls half buried in dust. Somewhere beneath them lie the bones of a vanished nation, and perhaps the answers we've yet to uncover. Until then, the Khazars remain one of history's great absences, a people who ruled, who chose a different path, and then faded, leaving behind only silence. And maybe, hidden within that silence, something still waits to be heard. In the highlands of Iceland, where the ground steams and cracks with ancient fire, glaciers sit like sleeping beasts over a restless earth. The air here is thin, the land quiet, but beneath it lies a secret, one tied not only to the northern reaches of Europe, but to a single, forgotten year that may have reshaped the world. The year was 536. To those who lived through it, there was no warning, no thunderclap from the sky, no divine proclamation. Just a sun that rose one morning dimmer than before. Then the next day, dimmer still. And soon, not a sunrise at all, but a dull, sallow glow behind a veil of ash-gray sky. It lasted for more than a year. Across the Roman Empire's eastern remnants, in Constantinople, chroniclers wrote of a mystery in the sky. The sun, they said, gave no proper light for 18 months. The heat never returned that summer. Crops failed. Famine followed. In Palestine, monks recorded hunger so widespread that entire communities vanished. In China, snowfall was reported in August. In Ireland, annals describe a failure of bread so severe that countless died. It was, as some historians now believe, the beginning of the worst decade to be alive. But what caused it? Mainstream science has only recently begun to piece together the puzzle. In the ice cores drilled from Greenland and Antarctica, a thin black line appears in layers dated to the mid-6th century, evidence of massive volcanic activity. Tiny particles of sulfate and tephra, likely from a volcanic eruption, suggest a cataclysmic event occurred somewhere in the northern hemisphere, possibly in Iceland. Not one eruption, but two, or perhaps more, within a few years, darkening the skies and poisoning the air. If this is true, it would explain much. A volcanic winter, triggered by the release of millions of tons of ash and sulfur into the atmosphere, would cool the Earth rapidly. Sunlight would be reflected away. Seasons would falter, crops would fail, and with hunger would come war, disease, collapse. Indeed, the years that followed 536 saw just that. In the Mediterranean, the Justinian plague struck in 541, a pandemic that decimated the Byzantine Empire. In the north, Germanic tribes pushed into weakened Roman territories. In Persia, political chaos surged. In Mesoamerica, entire cities show signs of abandonment during this same period. A chain reaction, disconnected by geography, but perhaps bound by something deeper. Yet the evidence remains incomplete. Where exactly did the eruption take place? Why do contemporary writers fail to name the event directly, even as they describe its effects? Was it one eruption, or multiple? And could there have been other factors? Cosmic, not earthly? Some researchers have explored more speculative ideas. A comet impact breaking apart in Earth's atmosphere could produce a similar dimming effect, spreading dust and debris on a global scale. Others have looked to solar activity, a sudden drop in radiation, a weakening of the sun's output, or a shift in magnetic patterns that affected the Earth's climate. Still others turn to ancient prophecy, pointing to traditions from the Norse, the Maya, or Zoroastrian texts that speak of long darkness or poisoned skies. Could these myths be echoes of a real event, one so profound it seared itself into cultural memory? And if so, what else might be hidden within the legends? There is something haunting about the silence that surrounds 536. Unlike other disasters, there is no single monument, no known epic, no lasting account. The silence may speak not of survival, but of devastation so widespread that few were left to tell the tale, and those who did may not have understood what had happened. In Scandinavia, tree rings tell a quiet story. Narrow bands from the mid-6th century mark a sudden dramatic cooling. The same is found in Siberia, in Peru, in North America. A global footprint, a planetary scar. How does a world survive when the sun disappears? For many, it didn't. Entire communities were lost. Trade routes collapsed. Languages fell out of use. In some regions, centuries of progress were reversed. And yet, from this crucible came transformation. New powers emerged. Religions adapted. Empires fell and others rose to take their place. But was it all a coincidence of timing? Or was the year 536 not just a dark chapter in history, but a fulcrum, a turning point driven by forces beyond human control, or perhaps beyond our understanding? We often think of history as a steady march, a timeline of wars and kings, inventions and ideas. But what if some of the most pivotal moments came not from human hands, but from the deep earth beneath us, or the sky above? The ash has settled, the world has turned, but the traces of that lost year remain, trapped in glaciers, in chronicles, in bones buried beneath long-forgotten villages. We may never know exactly what happened in 536, but the shadow it cast has never truly lifted. And somewhere, perhaps deep beneath Iceland's ancient ice or written in the code of the stars, the answer still waits, waiting to be uncovered. In the heart of Alexandria, once the jewel of Egypt's Mediterranean coast, sunlight lingers on broken marble and dust-covered columns, their once sharp engravings now softened by time. The ancient city breathes with the quiet tension of lost knowledge. Here, in this crossroads of the ancient world, philosophy once mingled with power, and science walked hand in hand with religion. But beneath this golden legacy lies a darker memory, one that speaks not of enlightenment, but of destruction. It is the year 415 AD. The streets are restless, tensions run high. Religious factions, political ambitions, and deep ideological divides swirl in the city like a storm gathering over the sea. At the center of this storm stood a woman, Hypatia, a philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer, unusual not only for her brilliance, but for her defiance of the limits placed on her by society. Hypatia of Alexandria taught at the Neoplatonist school, where students from across the Roman world came to learn geometry, astronomy, and philosophy. She moved freely through the city, her robes simple, her manner composed. But to some, she represented more than intellect. She was a symbol of the old pagan world, a vestige of classical reason in a city now torn between competing visions of faith. She advised political leaders, including the Roman prefect Orestes, who clashed bitterly with Cyril, the bishop of Alexandria. These clashes were not merely theological. They were struggles for control of the city itself. And Hypatia, unwillingly, found herself in the middle. what happened next is cloaked in ambiguity. Contemporary accounts, like those of Socrates Scholasticus and later John of Nicaea, offer conflicting views. Some portray Hypatia as a martyr of reason, others as a manipulator of political power. But what seems clear is this. On a day in March, as tensions boiled over, Hypatia was pulled from her chariot by a Christian mob, dragged through the streets, and killed. Some say flayed alive, others say beaten and dismembered with roofing tiles. Her body was burned, her voice silenced. But this was more than the brutal murder of a scholar. It marked a turning point. The so-called Hypatian Revolt wasn't a revolt in the traditional sense. There were no armies, no sieges. It was a revolt of ideas, an eruption of rage where political authority, religious fervor, and philosophical inquiry collided with deadly force. After Hypatia's death, the city changed. The old schools of thought withered, libraries closed. The philosophical lineage that had once extended back to Plato and Pythagoras dissolved into silence. What drove the mob to such extremes? The mainstream explanation is a convergence of power struggles. Hypatia was an advisor to Orestes, who resisted the growing authority of the church under Cyril. Her presence was viewed as a threat, her influence dangerous. In an atmosphere where every action was politicized, her neutrality was interpreted as opposition. But was there more? Some scholars have speculated that Hypatia possessed ancient texts long since lost, perhaps scrolls from the fabled Library of Alexandria, which by then had already suffered repeated fires and destruction. Could she have preserved knowledge too dangerous or too empowering for those seeking dominance? Fragments suggest she may have been working on astronomical models centuries ahead of her time. There are whispers that her notes included heliocentric theories, placing the sun, not the Earth, at the center of the universe. Ideas that would not re-emerge openly until Copernicus over 1,000 years later. If true, it would not be the first time history buried inconvenient truths. Then there are stranger theories, bordering on the fringe, yet persistent. That Hypatia was the guardian of sacred geometry tied to the lost architecture of Egypt. That her work intersected with esoteric knowledge passed down from earlier, now vanished civilizations. That symbols carved into temple stones, once dismissed as decorative, held mathematical ratios she alone could interpret. Why else, some ask, would her destruction be so complete? Her body obliterated, her writings lost, her memory twisted through contradictory accounts. It's as if history tried to erase her not just physically, but intellectually and spiritually. And yet, her name endures. Is it possible that Hypatia's death was not merely a murder, but a ritualistic purging of the past? A deliberate severing of Alexandria's classical roots in favor of a new order? Or was it simply the product of a chaotic time, when empires crumbled, ideologies clashed, and one extraordinary woman stood in the way? Even today, the spot where she was killed is debated. Some say near the Caesareum, once a Roman temple. Others claim it was in a street now buried under centuries of urban growth. The truth, like her legacy, is layered in myth and mystery. What would we find if we uncovered her personal writings? What ideas were cut short by her death? And how many others, unnamed and forgotten, were lost in similar tides of historical upheaval? In Alexandria, the wind still carries dust through broken halls and forgotten crypts. Somewhere beneath the stone, the final echoes of a mind silenced too soon may yet remain. Waiting. Beneath a blanket of moss and loam in the deep forests of the Pacific Northwest, the ruins of forgotten settlements rest in silence. Faint outlines of stone circles, overgrown pathways, and broken tools surface only when the forest floor is disturbed. No names, no records, just fragments of something that once was. These aren't the remnants of a known civilization. They belong to no chapter in our textbooks. And yet, they are real, standing quietly against the trees, as if waiting for someone to remember. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of these ruins is not their origin, but what they represent. Human history is not simply a story of progression, from primitive to modern, but a labyrinth of memories gained and memories lost. Over time, knowledge has vanished, not always through war or disaster, but by something more subtle, more elusive. A silence that settled across vast regions of the earth, a silence that historians and philosophers have come to call the Great Forgetting. What was forgotten, and why? It is one of the most unsettling questions in historical inquiry. We assume that human civilization has advanced in a more or less straight line, from the caves of early hominids to the glittering cities of today. But archaeological records suggest something more complex, that prior to the sudden rise of urban centers around 3000 BC, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, there were thousands of years where humans built, traveled, observed the stars, and possibly even wrote, and then, somehow, lost it all. Consider Göbekli Tepe, a site in southeastern Turkey. Massive stone pillars, some over 16 feet tall and weighing several tons, arranged in circles. Carvings of animals, foxes, snakes, cranes, etched with uncanny precision. Carbon dating places its construction around 9600 BC. That is thousands of years before the first recognized civilizations of Mesopotamia. According to traditional timelines, people at that time were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers. So who built Göbekli Tepe? And why was it intentionally buried under tons of earth? The discovery upended assumptions about when civilization began. But more than that, it hinted at something more disturbing. That between the end of the last ice age and the dawn of recorded history, something profound was lost. Not in one region, but across the globe. From submerged ruins off the coast of India to the megalithic platforms of South America, from ancient maps that appear to show Antarctica free of ice to oral traditions that speak of forgotten ages, pieces of a vast unknown puzzle begin to emerge. Mainstream scholars explain this great forgetting as a natural result of catastrophic climate shifts. Around 10,800 BC, Earth entered a period of severe cooling known as the Younger Dryas. Glaciers returned, ecosystems collapsed, populations were displaced. In the face of survival, culture and knowledge may have fallen by the wayside, and when the climate stabilized, the survivors had to start again, from scratch. But there are other theories. Some propose that global cataclysms, massive floods, asteroid impacts, volcanic winters, may have not only erased ancient settlements, but obliterated the very memory of them. Was there a precursor civilization? Something older than we currently acknowledge? One whose remnants lie buried beneath sediment, ice, or ocean. Others point to the strangely consistent mythologies across cultures. Flood stories from Mesopotamia, India, and the Americas. Legends of golden ages and sudden falls. Of wise ancestors, sky beings or lost continents, like Atlantis, sinking beneath the waves. Is it all coincidence? Or the distant echo of something real? More controversially, some suggest that certain knowledge may have been suppressed, not simply forgotten. That early societies might have understood cycles of time, celestial alignments, or energetic systems now dismissed as myth. That wisdom, mathematical, spiritual, astronomical, was preserved in symbols, monuments, and rituals, only to be misunderstood or misinterpreted in later ages. Could the design of ancient temples, aligned with solstices and equinoxes, be more than primitive astronomy? Could the mysterious similarities in pyramidal architecture across distant continents point to a once-connected network of knowledge? Then, there is the matter of writing itself. Writing is believed to have emerged in Sumer around 3200 BC. But tantalizing clues, undeciphered glyphs in caves, geometric symbols dating back tens of thousands of years challenge that timeline. What if writing existed long before, but was lost during a long, dark interlude of human history? And what of language? The Tower of Babel is often read as metaphor, a tale of human pride and divine punishment. But could it hint at a real event? A cultural fragmentation so deep that it severed a unified system of knowledge into countless tongues and traditions? A forgetfulness so thorough that we have no name for what we lost? The idea of a great forgetting is unsettling because it asks us to question the foundations of what we know, not just about our ancestors, but about ourselves. Are we truly the pinnacle of human development? Or are we walking paths once known, rediscovering truths already found and forgotten? Why were sites like Göbekli Tepe deliberately buried? Why do civilizations appear to rise fully formed, with writing, agriculture, architecture, only to collapse into obscurity? And how many times has humanity built, flourished, and then forgotten? In quiet museum basements, dusty storerooms of monasteries, and unexcavated lands stretching from the Amazon to the Himalayas, perhaps pieces of this lost memory still remain, waiting to be uncovered, waiting to be remembered. And if the past can be forgotten once, could it happen again? In the dim halls of forgotten monasteries and behind layers of dust on parchment scrolls, there are names, half legible, half lost. Names once inscribed with reverence, now obscured by time and silence. A few are scratched out deliberately, their ink scraped from the page, their identities buried beneath centuries of neglect. Others have simply faded, not just from the documents that held them, but from our collective memory. Across every ancient civilization, women once stood at the forefront: priests, poets, physicians, mathematicians, warriors, philosophers. And yet, for every Cleopatra or Hypatia whose story was allowed to survive, how many more were erased? As we emerge from the shadows of the so-called Great Forgetting, we find that part of what humanity forgot was half of itself. In Sumer, the first known author in human history was not a king or a scribe. It was a woman. Enheduanna, daughter of Sargon of Akkad, high priestess of the moon, god Nanna. Her hymns, written in cuneiform over 4,000 years ago, express profound spirituality and power. She wrote of cosmic order, of the divine feminine, of chaos and balance. And yet, her name is barely known outside academic circles. Why? How could the world forget the first voice to ever sign their name to a written work? As we move through time, we encounter figures like Merit Ptah of ancient Egypt, a physician around 2700 BC, referred to as the chief physician. For decades, she was celebrated as the first female doctor in history. But modern debates now question whether she existed at all, or whether her story was conflated with others. Is this a case of mistaken identity, or a deeper pattern of historical erasure? In ancient Greece, we learn of Agnodis, a woman who disguised herself as a man to study medicine, forbidden to her sex. She treated women in secret, eventually exposed and nearly executed, until her patients rose in protest to defend her. Whether fully factual or semi-legendary, the story speaks to something enduring. Knowledge gated by gender, voices denied legitimacy. The Roman world, too, offers whispers. Women like Hortensia, who stood before the Roman tribunal and eloquently protested taxation without representation. Her words, brave, clear, recorded, stood out because they were rare. But how many other women resisted, taught, healed, or led, without their deeds ever transcribed? And what of the East? In early China, Ban Zhao, a historian and scholar of the Han Dynasty, completed her brother's monumental Book of Han, an official chronicle of the empire. She taught palace women and composed treatises on morality, yet her legacy remains footnoted, her influence seldom acknowledged. From India comes the story of Gargi Vachaknavi, a philosopher priestess who engaged in philosophical debates with male sages as early as 700 BC. Her sharp intellect and theological insights were recorded in the Upanishads, yet even her name often disappears from the telling. Again and again, we encounter the same pattern. Women who shaped the foundation of civilization through governance, medicine, literature, and science, only to be later buried under patriarchal systems of inheritance, authorship, and education. Their contributions fragmented, overwritten, or claimed by male successors. Why did this happen? Mainstream historians point to the shift from matrilineal or balanced societies to patriarchal ones. With the rise of centralized states and formalized religions, many of which emphasized male dominance, women were gradually excluded from the institutions that recorded history: temples, courts, universities, scriptoriums. Without access to literacy or public life, their voices faded. But is that the full story? There are scholars who believe the suppression was not merely incidental but strategic, that the knowledge women preserved, especially in healing, astronomy, midwifery, and spiritual practice, threatened emerging power structures. In Europe, the witch hunts of the late medieval period targeted not just superstition, but women who served as herbalists, midwives, and community leaders, custodians of traditional knowledge now deemed heretical. And what about the ancient mystery schools, the priestess orders of Egypt, Delphi, and Anatolia? Were they disbanded naturally, or were they forcibly dismantled and their wisdom hidden or destroyed? Are the gaps in our understanding of early religions partly due to the silencing of their female practitioners? Some fringe theorists go even further, suggesting entire civilizations led or shaped by women may have existed prior to the historical record, cultures wiped out in the upheavals of ancient cataclysms or assimilated by more aggressive patriarchal societies. Could there have been matriarchal or egalitarian civilizations whose systems of power and memory were simply incompatible with the empires that followed? Even today, archaeology reveals hints of forgotten matrilineal societies, from the Minoans of Crete, whose art and governance suggest a prominent role for women, to the Nairs of Kerala and the Mosuo of China. Could these be echoes of a deeper, older tradition, one intentionally buried? And then there are the untold thousands, women whose names never made it to parchment, whose work passed down orally, quietly, through generations. The mother who taught the stars to her children, the healer who preserved ancient plant lore, the weaver who encoded sacred geometry into cloth, the midwife who passed along wisdom older than writing. Are we perhaps just beginning to uncover their legacy? In recent years, more lost works attributed to women have come to light: poems, treatises, letters, preserved only by chance in remote libraries or private collections. How many others remain unread in dusty archives or buried in ruins awaiting rediscovery? And what does it mean for our understanding of the past that so many of its architects were silenced? If history is written by the victors, who writes for those never allowed to compete? What have we lost, not only in fact but in spirit, by erasing the other half of our human story? Somewhere in the dim margins of forgotten scrolls and stone, their stories wait, waiting to be seen, waiting to be remembered. High in the rolling hills of southern France, the sun filters softly through the mist, catching on ancient stone towers, broken battlements, and moss-covered walls. The ruined fortress of Montségur clings to a lonely peak, its silhouette carved against the sky like a wound that never closed. The wind whispers here, not just through the grass, but through time itself. Echoes of fire, steel, and silence still haunt the stones. This was once the final stronghold of a people who vanished not only from their homeland, but from the pages of history itself. The year was 1209. The hills of Occitania, an independent and culturally rich region distinct from the northern French kingdom, were home to a spiritual movement unlike anything sanctioned by Rome. They called themselves good Christians. We remember them today as the Cathars. Their beliefs were radical. They rejected the material world, seeing it as a prison crafted by an evil force. They believed in reincarnation. They denied the authority of the Catholic Church. They had no churches, no altars, no priests, only humble guides who lived by example. To the eyes of the medieval world, they were heretics. But to their followers, they offered something pure, incorruptible, and deeply spiritual. The Church saw them as a threat, not only theologically, but politically. The Cathars weren't isolated mystics. They were embedded in the very fabric of southern French nobility, tied to powerful families, protected by regional lords, and cherished by commoners disillusioned with Rome's wealth and corruption. Pope Innocent III responded with an answer that would reshape European history: a crusade. But unlike those launched to the east, this crusade would not target Muslims or distant lands. It would turn inward, toward fellow Christians. The Albigensian Crusade, named after the town of Albi, began in a blaze of righteous fury. It would last over 2 decades. The stated goal was the eradication of heresy. But as the blood began to flow, it became clear that this was also a war of conquest. The siege of Béziers set the tone. When asked how to distinguish Cathars from Catholics, the papal legate is said to have replied, "Kill them all, God will know his own." Whether this quote is apocryphal or not, what followed was not. Some 20,000 people were slaughtered, entire cities razed. Heresy, it seemed, was contagious enough to justify annihilation. Montségur, the last Cathar stronghold, held out until 1244, surrounded, starved, betrayed from within. When the walls finally fell, over 200 Cathars, men, women, and children, refused to recant. They were led down the mountain and burned en masse in a field still known as Prat dels Cremats, the field of the burned. But even as the flames consumed them, legends took root. What were the Cathars protecting at Montségur? Some chroniclers speak of 4 Cathar perfects who slipped through the siege lines days before the fortress fell, carrying a mysterious object or set of writings. Some say it was a sacred book. Others suggest it was a treasure, not of gold, but of knowledge. A secret too dangerous to let fall into enemy hands. And so, the speculation begins. Were the Cathars merely a medieval heresy, or were they guardians of a more ancient wisdom handed down from lost civilizations? Some fringe theories connect them to Gnostic sects from the early Christian era, or even further back, to esoteric currents from Egypt, Babylon, or even Atlantis. The parallels between Cathar beliefs and earlier dualistic systems are striking. Their rejection of the material world, their emphasis on inner purity, their cosmology of light and shadow, these echo teachings long buried by orthodoxy. Others point to their supposed connection with the Holy Grail. The idea, popularized in modern myth and fiction, suggests Montségur wasn't just a military fortress. It was a spiritual vault, a sanctuary for sacred relics, guarded by a line of initiated keepers. Some even propose the Grail was not an object, but a lineage, or a body of knowledge suppressed by the Church. Mainstream historians reject such ideas, citing lack of evidence and the speculative nature of the claims. But even without the fringe theories, questions linger. Why did the Cathars rise so quickly? Why did their teachings resonate so deeply across social classes? And why was the response to their presence so utterly extreme? Was the fear of heresy truly about theology, or was it about the threat of autonomy? The Cathars lived outside the feudal hierarchical order. Their beliefs undermined not just the authority of Rome, but the very logic of power. To them, priests were unnecessary. Kings were not divinely appointed. The body was not sacred. The world, perhaps, was a lie. In that light, perhaps the Crusade wasn't just about enforcing orthodoxy. It was about erasing an alternative. Today, in Languedoc, traces remain. Stone towers, secret cave chapels, songs passed down in the Occitan tongue, symbols carved discreetly into wood and rock, crosses of equal arms, circles within squares, remnants of a worldview once branded dangerous, now almost forgotten. And yet, something resists oblivion. Occasionally, new manuscripts surface, fragments of Cathar scripture, written in strange dialects. Historians puzzle over them, trying to separate myth from memory. And always, the same question returns. What else might lie hidden, in vaults, in libraries, in unmarked tombs beneath these ancient hills? What did the Cathars truly believe? Why did they die with such unshakable conviction? And most haunting of all, what did they know? As we sift through the ashes of Montségur and trace the outlines of what was lost, we are left not with certainty, but with silence. A silence filled with the weight of questions we may never answer. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's what makes this chapter of history so chilling. Not what we remember, but what we were never allowed to know. Beneath the Atlantic sun, where waves crash endlessly against cliffs of volcanic stone, the Canary Islands rise like jagged monuments from the sea. Their rugged terrain, carved by wind and fire, feels ancient, older than memory. And among the mist-covered ridges of Tenerife and the silent valleys of La Gomera, one can still sense an echo of a vanished people, a presence lingering just beyond reach. They were known as the Guanches. For centuries, they lived in isolation, their world untouched by the forces that had reshaped Europe and North Africa. When the Spanish first set foot on these islands in the 14th and 15th centuries, they encountered a people who seemed out of time. Tall, fair-haired in some regions, often blue-eyed, living without metal tools, herding goats, and mummifying their dead in caves high above the sea. Who were the Guanches, really? The earliest chroniclers were baffled. These islanders spoke a language unrelated to the tongues of the Iberian world. They bore no knowledge of navigation, yet lived on remote islands hundreds of kilometers from the nearest continental shore. Most curious of all, they had no ships, no means of reaching or leaving the islands. They existed in total insularity, as if placed there and forgotten. Mainstream scholars today trace their roots to North Africa, specifically the Berber populations of the Maghreb. Linguistic traces, burial customs, and early tools support this theory. Some suggest the Guanches were part of a migration wave thousands of years ago, during a time when climate and currents made sea travel from the African coast to the islands less perilous than it would later become. But questions remain. Why would a people capable of reaching the islands lose all memory of seafaring? Why did they fail to develop boats afterward, or even legends of their arrival? Could they have been marooned? Or were they the remnants of something far older than any current timeline suggests? The physical characteristics of the Guanches stirred fascination in early European explorers. Their height, occasional light complexion, and distinct skeletal features led to all manner of speculation. Some early theories, now outdated, claimed they were of Nordic or Atlantean origin. Fringe thinkers extended this further, suggesting that the Guanches were survivors of a lost civilization, perhaps the last echo of an advanced culture that once spanned the Atlantic. There are even stories, quiet ones recorded in local oral traditions of giant ancestors, of forgotten gods, and of a time when the sea rose and swallowed entire lands. Similar legends appear across cultures, from the Dogon of Mali to the Basques of northern Spain. And here, on these lonely islands, those whispers seem to take root in the very rock. The Guanches practiced elaborate funerary rites. They embalmed their dead with great care, placing them in sacred caves aligned with seasonal light and celestial events. Some of these burial chambers resemble the dolmens and megalithic sites of Europe, not just in construction, but in orientation. Were these similarities coincidental, or do they point to a deeper shared memory, one now mostly erased? Their dwellings, often carved into cliffs, were austere but deliberate. Some sites, like Cueva de Axbinico in Tenerife, show continuous ritual use from pre-Hispanic times through to the early Christian era. The layering of traditions suggests more than mere adaptation. It suggests preservation. Yet the Spanish conquest was swift and brutal. By the end of the 15th century, the Guanche world was unraveling. Resistance was fierce but futile. Disease, war, and slavery decimated their numbers. The survivors were absorbed into the colonial framework. Their language vanished. Their stories diluted. Within 2 generations, the Guanches were no longer a people, but a memory. Still, pieces remain. DNA studies have revealed that Guanche ancestry persists among modern Canarians, particularly through maternal lines. This suggests that Guanche women, more than men, were absorbed into the new social order. Their blood remains, even if their voice has been silenced. But every so often, archaeology brings a fragment back into focus. In a cave on La Palma, strange pictographs have been found, untranslated, their purpose unclear. On Gran Canaria, pyramidal structures have stirred debate. Are they agricultural terraces or sacred platforms? Their alignment with solstices and their resemblance to structures in Peru and Mesoamerica invite comparison. Coincidence, or a sign of forgotten transoceanic connections? And then there's the enigma of the Canary Islands' very name. Some say it derives not from the birds, but from the Latin Canariae Insulae, islands of the dogs. Roman writers mentioned large dogs kept by the native people, but others believe the name hints at something else, a totemic reverence, a symbolic code, perhaps even a guardian myth now long lost. Could the Guanches be more than a vanished tribe? Could they be the broken-off limb of something more ancient, something erased not only by conquest, but by time itself? We are left with partial clues: mummies buried in stone vaults, bones arranged with intention, rock engravings facing the stars. No written records, no surviving language, only the land and the silence it keeps. What did the Guanches remember that we have forgotten? Were they the last of the early seafarers, driven inland by loss and mythologized in death? Or were they placed here by history's shifting tides, left behind like driftwood from a world drowned long ago? In the end, the mystery of the Guanches is not only about what we find, but about what we can no longer know. The past speaks softly on these islands, and only to those who listen with patience. So we ask, are the caves truly empty? Or are they still holding something sacred, just out of reach? The eastern edge of the Nile Delta is a land of shifting silt and ancient silence. Here, where the great river fans out into the Mediterranean, the air carries a stillness that feels both natural and unnatural, as though something once vast and powerful has been buried, not only by time, but by deliberate forgetting. Beneath the farmland and villages near the modern town of Tel El Daba, a forgotten city sleeps beneath the earth. Its name was Avaris. To the eye, nothing grand remains on the surface. No towering obelisks or monumental temples greet the traveler, but dig beneath the floodplain, and a different world begins to emerge. A city of palaces, ports, gardens, and graves. Avaris was once the capital of a mysterious kingdom that ruled northern Egypt during one of its darkest and least understood chapters. This was the heart of the Hyksos realm. The Hyksos, foreign rulers in the land of Kemet. Mainstream Egyptology identifies them as a Semitic people, likely from the Levant, who migrated into Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period, around 1650 BC. They brought with them technologies the Egyptians had never seen before: the horse-drawn chariot, advanced metallurgy, and new forms of warfare. And from Avaris, they established control over much of Lower Egypt, ruling not as mere invaders, but as kings. But how did this foreign dynasty rise to power so swiftly, and why did their memory provoke such hostility that even their names were struck from records? The archaeological story of Avaris is complex. At its height, the city sprawled across hundreds of hectares, complete with elaborate water systems, foreign-style temples, and an unusually cosmopolitan population. Tombs reveal people from Canaan, Cyprus, Nubia, and beyond, merchants, soldiers, and elites, buried side by side. This was no ordinary Egyptian city. It was a place of mixing, of movement, of cultural fusion. And perhaps that is what made it dangerous. According to later Egyptian texts, the Hyksos were reviled. The New Kingdom pharaohs who eventually expelled them portrayed the Hyksos as cruel occupiers who defiled the sacred traditions of the Nile. Yet the archaeological record tells a more nuanced story, one of adaptation, not destruction. The Hyksos adopted Egyptian religious symbols, participated in native customs, and integrated with local populations. Still, their foreignness was never forgotten. Was it fear that drove their erasure, or was something more hidden at stake? Some scholars have noted strange coincidences between the Hyksos period and biblical narratives, particularly the story of Joseph. In some interpretations, Avaris is seen not just as the capital of foreign kings, but as a possible home for Semitic peoples who rose to power under unusual circumstances. Could the 7 years of famine mentioned in ancient texts have corresponded with a real event, one that made foreign advisors indispensable to Pharaoh? This leads to more speculative terrain. In the 1980s, excavations at Tel El Daba uncovered a massive palace complex, unlike anything found elsewhere in Egypt from the same period. Within it were courtyards, porticos, and Minoan-style frescoes, scenes of bulls and dancers reminiscent of Knossos on Crete. What were these Mediterranean images doing in the capital of the Hyksos? Some have suggested the palace belonged to a high-ranking Semitic administrator, a figure elevated in status far beyond what would be expected. One burial site, strangely, lacks a body but includes a massive tomb and statue fragments of a Semitic man. He wears a striped coat. The parallels are hard to ignore. Could this be the memory of a figure whose story was transformed into legend? Mainstream scholars are cautious. They note the dangers of projecting modern or religious frameworks onto ancient ruins. But the silence that surrounds Avaris is still telling. After its fall, the city was abandoned and eventually built over by the pharaohs of the New Kingdom. Later, the great capital of Piri Reis was constructed atop its ruins, using its stones, its layout, its infrastructure. A new story imposed on the bones of the old. But why here? Avaris had access to vital trade routes and ports, yet it also held symbolic power, a link to a past that Egypt wanted to forget, or perhaps a past that Egypt could not afford to remember. Some fringe theorists have gone further. They speculate that Avaris may have been the Egyptian seat of a powerful lost civilization, one connected through trade and culture to Crete, Mesopotamia, and even lands farther west. They point to shared symbols, mythological overlaps, and the sudden disappearance of the city as evidence of a deeper mystery. Others suggest that what happened at Avaris was part of a broader pattern. Cycles of cultural amnesia repeated across the ancient world. Powerful cities rise, foreign rulers ascend, knowledge is exchanged, then wiped clean by successor regimes who fear what that knowledge represented. And here lies the real enigma. If Avaris was merely a city of opportunistic migrants, why does it remain so deeply buried, literally and historically? Why do the texts that mention it do so with venom, and why does its archaeology continue to challenge neat narratives about Egypt's unbroken glory? Was Avaris a threat to the cultural memory of a nation that prized order over chaos? Or was it something else entirely? Perhaps a brief window into a more interconnected ancient world, one that defies modern borders and timelines. Today, the wind moves softly over the fields near Tel El Daba. Beneath the crops and irrigation channels, buried foundations still hold secrets. Pottery shards whisper of foreign tongues. Decayed wall paintings hint at forgotten alliances. The city has not spoken in millennia, but its silence grows heavier with every passing year. Could Avaris be more than a historical anomaly? Could it be a message from the past, one that we've only begun to decipher? And if so, what truths did its erasure try to protect? Nestled in the soft, undulating hills between Tuscany and Umbria, where morning mist clings to olive groves and the air smells faintly of pine and damp earth, lies a sliver of land so small it barely appears on most maps. The road winds gently through fields and vineyards until, without fanfare or marker, one crosses into what was once one of the strangest republics in European history. A republic born not from revolution or conquest, but from a clerical mistake. Cospaia. A name few have heard, and fewer still remember. Yet, for nearly 4 centuries, this tiny village existed entirely outside the laws of any kingdom or papacy. No king ruled here. No pope collected taxes. From 1440 to 1826, Cospaia was, officially and legally, a republic, independent, free. The story begins, as many such tales do, in the tangled complexities of Renaissance politics. In 1440, the Papal States sold a stretch of land to the Republic of Florence. The boundary was defined by a river, simple enough. But a cartographic oversight caused confusion. The Rio, the river in question, forked unexpectedly near the village of Cospaia. Both Florence and the Papal States assumed the other had taken control of the forked land. Neither did. And so Cospaia, a mere 3 square kilometers in size, slipped between the cracks of history. But what should have been an administrative error quietly corrected became something far stranger. The villagers of Cospaia recognized their unique situation and embraced it. They declared independence. No army was sent to crush them. No edict reversed the mistake. Perhaps it was too small to matter. Perhaps the powers of the day were simply too busy with wars, trade, and the rise and fall of empires. Whatever the reason, Cospaia remained free, and it thrived. Without taxes, tariffs, or external rule, the tiny republic became a haven for contraband trade, most notably tobacco. When smoking leaf first arrived in Europe from the Americas, it was banned or heavily regulated in many regions. But in Cospaia, with no authority to impose such bans, tobacco grew freely. By the 17th century, the village was renowned across central Italy as a hub for the black market tobacco trade. Did this accidental freedom enable a unique form of early capitalism, or something else entirely? Here, things grow murky. Some accounts speak of wealth flooding into Cospaia. Others describe a place riddled with smugglers and outlaws, where church and state held no sway. and rules were negotiated among families. There are no detailed archives, no formal census. Even the boundaries were little more than understood rather than defined. For centuries, Cospaia existed in this liminal space, officially unrecognized, yet never challenged. The villagers printed their own motto, Perpetua et firma libertas, perpetual and firm liberty. What did liberty mean in a world ruled by princes, popes, and warlords? Could a village of a few hundred peasants truly exist outside the system? And if they could, who else might have tried? Some suggest that Cospaia's unusual longevity points to a forgotten pattern, tiny zones of ambiguous sovereignty scattered across the continent, hiding in the shadows of bureaucracy and geography. Other micro-republics, such as San Marino or Seborga, have their own tales of improbable survival. But Cospaia's story is different. It was never ratified, never sanctioned by treaty. It was, quite literally, a mistake that refused to correct itself. And the tobacco? Here the story deepens. Cospaia's early adoption of tobacco and its free cultivation without oversight may have made it a key player in the European dissemination of the crop. Some theories even link Cospaia to shadowy networks of traders, alchemists, and early pharmacologists experimenting with tobacco's medicinal and ritualistic uses. Was the Republic a quiet nexus for esoteric knowledge? An early incubator of ideas that defied the control of the Catholic Church? There are fragments, letters between monks in nearby monasteries discussing the strange liberties of Cospaia, references in Florentine merchant ledgers to smoke leaf from the Forbidden Hill, even a few accounts that suggest Cospaia may have been a meeting point for thinkers and dissenters fleeing persecution. Is it possible that, behind the simplicity of tobacco farming and accidental independence, a deeper story played out? One that history preferred not to record? As the centuries passed, Cospaia remained an oddity. It fought no wars. It signed no alliances. It remained, somehow, untouched. But by the early 19th century, the world around it had changed. Napoleon had reshaped Europe. The papacy reasserted control over central Italy. In 1826, after nearly 400 years of independence, Cospaia quietly signed itself back into existence, divided between the Papal States and the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. No battles, no resistance. Just a simple end to a forgotten anomaly, but perhaps not entirely forgotten. Even today, echoes of the Republic survive in oral histories, local traditions, and the quiet pride of villagers. A few buildings still bear the coat of arms. Some families trace their roots to Cospaia's defiant farmers and smugglers. And the motto, Perpetua et firma libertas, can still be found carved into old stone. What was Cospaia, really? An accident of geography? A curiosity of paperwork? Or something more? An unplanned experiment in human autonomy that lasted far longer than anyone might have expected? And if Cospaia could exist for nearly 4 centuries with no king, no church oversight, and no external rule, how many other forgotten republics might have come and gone, unrecorded, simply lost to time? Or are some of them still out there, hidden in plain sight? In a quiet corner of a European museum, perhaps in Germany, France, or Britain, resting behind glass and softly lit by controlled light, sits a small bronze object. Barely the size of a clenched fist, it's easy to miss. Its surface is weathered but intact, greenish with age, pocked slightly by time. It has 12 flat faces, each carved into a perfect pentagon. From each of these faces, a circular hole has been drilled straight through the metal. At every corner where the faces meet, a small sphere protrudes, delicate and deliberate. It is neither entirely ornate nor strictly functional. It is a Roman dodecahedron, and no one knows what it was for. Over 100 of these objects have been discovered, scattered across the former frontiers of the Roman Empire, from the misty highlands of Scotland to the damp fields of Hungary. Not a single one has ever been unearthed in the Roman heartlands around the Mediterranean, nor in Palestine or North Africa, always on the fringes, always far from the heart of the empire, and always without context. No inscriptions, no maker's mark, no references in Roman literature, no depictions in art or sculpture. They appear in graves, hoards, and forgotten layers of settlement, often alongside everyday Roman artifacts. Yet they stand apart, utterly unique in design, alien to the usual tools, weapons, or religious items of the age. What were these curious 12-faced objects used for? Theories have multiplied over the centuries. Some suggest they were candlestick holders, pointing to the symmetry and the hollow center. But no wax residue has ever been found. Others propose that they were tools for measuring distances or angles, perhaps used by engineers or surveyors. But then, why do the holes vary in size, often irregularly, from face to face? A more imaginative theory suggests they were astronomical instruments, calibrated to measure the height of the sun or the angle of a star. Some have posited they were used to determine planting dates or agricultural cycles, particularly in regions where the Roman calendar was poorly suited to local climates. Still others believe they may have served as a kind of rangefinder in military formations, estimating distances or alignments on uneven terrain. Yet for every theory, there is a contradiction. No two dodecahedrons are exactly the same. Their dimensions vary. Their craftsmanship ranges from crude to finely cast, and their distribution appears oddly selective. Why would a standardized tool vary so widely? Why are they found only in the northwestern provinces? Others turn to ritual explanations. Perhaps they were used in some form of divination, tossed like dice, or held aloft during ceremonial acts. Their geometric symmetry suggests symbolic importance. The number 12 has echoed throughout human belief systems. 12 months in the year, 12 zodiac signs, 12 Olympian gods. Could these objects have embodied a sacred pattern, a representation of cosmic order, or celestial balance? A few fringe researchers have suggested links to lost knowledge, perhaps vestiges of an earlier forgotten science preserved within the outer edges of empire. Their precise geometric form, paired with their elusive function, makes them ideal candidates for speculative theories. Some even see connections to advanced mathematics, suggesting the dodecahedrons encode numerical relationships beyond what the Romans are thought to have used. Could they be remnants of a tradition the Romans encountered but did not understand, assimilating without fully integrating? In more recent years, experimental archaeologists have attempted to reconstruct their use. Some argue that the objects could have served as knitting tools, used to shape the fingers of woolen gloves. Indeed, in parts of the Northern Empire, where winters were bitter and long, warm clothing was essential. Demonstrations have shown how a skilled hand could loop thread through the holes, forming consistent patterns. Yet again, there is no textual or visual confirmation. No wool fibers have been found on the metal. No pattern books or instructions. No grave goods showing incomplete work. Another layer of intrigue is added by the locations where they are discovered. Many dodecahedrons are found near garrisons or military settlements. Could they have been linked to the Roman army? A signal device? A teaching tool? A symbol of rank or initiation? Or were they merely the playthings or totems of soldiers stationed far from home, personal objects tied to regional customs or beliefs? And then there are the spheres at each vertex, those curious nubs of bronze that serve no obvious mechanical purpose. Why include them? They're too small to anchor anything substantial, yet too deliberate to be decorative alone. Some theorists suggest they served to stabilize the object when rested on a surface or to offer grip. Others suggest symbolic meaning, points of energy, perhaps, or markers in a forgotten numerological system. Could these dodecahedrons represent something we no longer have the language to describe? As we gaze at one of these artifacts, silent, unassuming, yet profoundly strange, we are reminded of how much we've lost. The Romans left us a vast archive of knowledge, texts, monuments, roads, calendars, aqueducts. But here, in the form of a 12-sided bronze puzzle, lies something that escaped their chroniclers, something deemed either too mundane to mention or too mysterious to explain. Why were they made? Why only on the outskirts of empire? And why, across centuries and thousands of miles, did no one write down even a single line about them? Could it be that the people who truly understood them were not Roman at all, but local craftsmen, shamans, or engineers whose traditions were swallowed by the empire and erased from the record? Or might these objects serve as a quiet reminder that even the mightiest civilizations fail to document everything? That even in an empire obsessed with order and record, some secrets slip through? And if so, what else might be waiting beneath the soil, beneath the silence, beneath the certainty of what we think we know? The Roman dodecahedron remains untouched by clear answers, a relic without a purpose, a mystery in 12 parts. In a dimly lit chamber deep within the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, surrounded by centuries of imperial memory, a single sheet of gazelle skin lies protected under glass. Its surface is covered in elegant Arabic script, ornate compass roses, and finely detailed coastlines that snake across the page. The ink, faded but still legible, traces the boundaries of an unfamiliar world, a world as it was known, and perhaps as it was once imagined. This is the Piri Reis Map, created in 1513 by Ottoman admiral and cartographer Ahmed Muhiddin Piri, better known as Piri Reis. Just one fragment of the original world map survives, a rough semicircle of parchment measuring about 3 feet across. But within it lies a mystery that has puzzled historians, geographers, and theorists for decades. At first glance, it appears to be a navigational chart of the Atlantic Ocean, showing the western coasts of Europe and Africa and the eastern coastline of the Americas. But then the eye is drawn farther south to a landmass that curves beneath the known world, an icy, mountainous coastline, labeled with place names and drawn with surprising detail. Some believe this is the northern coast of South America, distorted by the early cartographer's perspective. Others see something far more puzzling. Could this be a depiction of Antarctica, centuries before its official discovery? And if so, how? Piri Reis himself claimed that his map was compiled not from direct observation, but from a collection of earlier sources, some ancient, some lost. In the cartouche inscribed along its edge, he writes that he used maps from 20 charts and Mappe Mundi, including charts drawn in the days of Alexander the Great. He also references Arabic and even older Indian sources, suggesting a transmission of geographical knowledge through generations, empires, and civilizations long gone. This admission is not unusual for the time. Cartographers of the early 16th century routinely borrowed from earlier documents. But what makes the Piri Reis map so unusual is the apparent accuracy of its southernmost landmass. When compared to modern satellite images, some believe the shape and proportions bear resemblance to the Queen Maud Land coast of Antarctica, specifically the continent as it would appear free of ice. And yet, Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820. Even then, its icy shores proved nearly impossible to chart with precision. So how could Piri Reis, relying on documents centuries older, have access to such knowledge? Mainstream historians offer cautious explanations. They suggest that the landmass may be a misrepresentation of South America, drawn southward and twisted by error, or perhaps a speculative addition to fill space on a partially complete chart. Others propose that cartographers of the time occasionally included mythical or hypothetical lands, drawn more from imagination than observation. Still, the detail remains. The shape of the coastline, the placement of mountains, and the curvature of bays seem to defy easy dismissal. Some argue that this level of detail would have required knowledge of the continent before it was covered in ice, suggesting a time tens of thousands of years ago when Antarctica's coasts were temperate and accessible. That idea, of course, veers far beyond accepted history, but it raises tantalizing questions. Could ancient civilizations, now lost, have possessed navigational skills sophisticated enough to map the globe with near-modern precision? Might there have been seafaring cultures capable of traversing the southern oceans, recording lands that would later vanish beneath the ice? Or did they simply inherit knowledge from an even older lineage, one that predates the rise of written history? Some theorists connect the Piri Reis Map to tales of Atlantis, or to civilizations like the Olmecs and the ancient Egyptians, suggesting that fragments of their knowledge survived through secret schools or esoteric traditions. Others point to the possibility of ancient aerial mapping, now an idea relegated to the realm of speculation. Yet the map remains, and it is not the only anomaly of its kind. The Piri Reis Map joins a small family of ancient and early modern charts that hint at lost geographical knowledge. The Orontius Phineas map of 1531, for instance, also appears to show an ice-free Antarctica. The Guanches map, drawn in the 18th century, claims to depict subglacial features that would not be confirmed until the 20th century use of seismic equipment. Each of these documents adds another thread to the tapestry of mystery, suggesting a web of forgotten sources, now reduced to fragments and whispers. Skeptics urge caution. They point out the lack of contextual support, the dangers of confirmation bias, and the tendency to project modern understanding onto ancient maps. After all, cartographers in the age of discovery were operating with incomplete data, often forced to blend fact and guesswork. But even they concede the inclusion of such detail, particularly at the extreme southern end of the world, remains difficult to explain. Back in the quiet hall of the Topkapi Palace, the Piri Reis Map rests undisturbed. Scholars continue to study it, to debate its sources, its meanings, and its implications. Each curved line, each note in the margin, each coastal outline presents another opportunity to glimpse into a history that is both known and not known. Did Piri Reis simply inherit a patchwork of misunderstood maps, each layered with errors and omissions? Or was he the last to glimpse a legacy of ancient exploration, one that has since slipped beneath the waves of time? And if so, what else have we forgotten? The gazelle skin remains, fragile and silent, asking no questions but offering no answers. It sits between the realms of possibility and mystery, between what we believe we know and what we may one day rediscover. Beneath the dry, sun-bleached skies of southern Peru, where the desert wind carries whispers from a time long forgotten, lies the small town of Ica. Surrounded by vast stretches of ochre sand and the jagged silhouettes of the Andean foothills, this quiet place seems unremarkable at first glance. But hidden behind rusting gates, stacked in dimly lit rooms and dusty storerooms, are thousands of carved stones, each bearing images that defy history and perhaps even belief. They are known as the Ica Stones. Smooth and dark, most are shaped from andesite, a hard volcanic rock. Their sizes vary. Some fit comfortably in the palm of a hand. Others are as large as small tablets. On their surfaces are engraved a startling array of images: humans coexisting with dinosaurs, advanced surgical procedures, telescopes, strange machines, and star maps. Some stones show men riding what appear to be long-necked sauropods. Others display scenes that resemble open-heart surgery or brain transplants. A few even depict the Earth as viewed from space. How could this be? In a land steeped in ancient cultures, home to the Nazca lines, the Paracas skulls, and the Inca Empire, the Ica Stones stand apart. They do not fit into the known timeline of pre-Columbian civilizations. Their content seems, at best, anachronistic, at worst, impossible. The first known mentions of carved stones in the region date back to the 16th century. In 1562, a Spanish conquistador named Pedro Cieza de Leon recorded that native peoples spoke of strange stones bearing ancient knowledge. But these early references were vague and quickly faded into obscurity. It wasn't until the 1960s that the stones resurfaced in the public eye, this time in great numbers. A local farmer, Basilio Uschuya, claimed to have unearthed hundreds of the stones from a cave near the Nazca Desert. He began selling them to tourists and researchers alike. One man in particular became captivated: Dr. Javier Cabrera, a local physician and scholar. Cabrera believed the stones were evidence of a lost civilization, one with technological abilities far beyond anything previously imagined for ancient South America. He began collecting them by the thousands. By the time of his death, Cabrera's private museum housed over 11,000 stones. He developed elaborate theories that the stones were the legacy of an advanced prehistoric race, one that had fled to another planet following a cataclysm. He believed these people had coexisted with dinosaurs, practiced complex medicine, and charted the stars with precision. Mainstream archaeologists were quick to reject these claims. They pointed to the lack of archaeological context. No verified excavation had ever recovered the stones under scientifically controlled conditions. And then came the confession. Basilio Uschuya admitted in a 1970s interview that he had forged many of the stones using a dentist's drill and reference books. He claimed he faked them to make money. Case closed? Not quite. While many of the stones were likely modern creations, the question remains: were all of them faked? Some researchers argue that among the thousands collected, a few may predate Uschuya's admitted fabrications. The techniques used for carving and patination, the weathering that occurs over time, have been debated. Some stones do appear to exhibit a natural oxidation that would be difficult to reproduce artificially. Others show fine dust deep within the engravings, seemingly consistent with great age. The scientific community remains largely unmoved. Without verifiable context or dating, the Ica stones are dismissed as hoaxes, curiosities of a modern myth. And yet, their content continues to provoke curiosity. How could an illiterate farmer in a remote Peruvian village in the 1960s produce such a vast volume of intricately detailed images, many of which seem to depict scientific knowledge he had no access to? Why do some stones feature internal human anatomy in surprising detail, or astronomical concepts like heliocentric models and planetary alignment? Some fringe theorists suggest the stones are remnants of an antediluvian culture, one that existed before a global catastrophe, such as a great flood or pole shift. Others speculate that the stones represent a form of living memory, encoded by an earlier race of humans, or even non-human intelligence. A few suggest alien contact. Then there are those who take a different approach entirely. They argue that the Ica stones are not frauds or revelations, but expressions, myths carved in stone. Like the figures on the Nazca desert floor or the frescoes of medieval cathedrals, they may reflect visions, dreams, or symbolic systems unknown to us today. In this view, the dinosaurs, surgeries, and telescopes might not be literal, but metaphorical, an artistic language lost in translation. Still, The volume and specificity of the stones are hard to dismiss entirely. Even if the majority are fakes, could they have been inspired by something older, something now vanished? It's a strange legacy to contemplate, a collection of thousands of stones, too detailed to ignore, too dubious to embrace, a puzzle that sits on the border of folklore and forgery, science and speculation. Today, most of the Ica Stones sit in quiet obscurity. Cabrera's museum, though still open, receives few visitors. The academic world has turned its attention elsewhere, and yet, every now and then, someone stumbles across them, online, in a forgotten book, or deep in the archives of pseudoscience, and finds themselves asking the same questions. What if one of them is real? What if, hidden among the copies and inventions, lies a message from another time? And if so, who were they trying to reach? In the silence of the desert, under the shifting sands and the relentless sun, the Ica Stones continue to wait. Whether they are relics of a forgotten past, or merely reflections of our deepest desires to touch the unknown, one thing remains certain. They have not yet given up all their secrets. Locked within a climate-controlled vault in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, northern Italy, lies one of the most debated and mysterious religious relics in all of recorded history, the Shroud of Turin. A length of linen cloth, aged, yellowed, and stained, it measures roughly 14 feet long by 3.5 feet wide. At first glance, it appears like any other ancient textile. But look closer, and an image begins to emerge. There, faint yet unmistakable, is the impression of a man's body, front and back, as if the cloth had once wrapped around him. The figure bears the signs of profound suffering, wounds on the wrists and feet that suggest piercing, lacerations across the back, and a flow of blood from the head, as though from a crown of thorns. It is a striking image, haunting in its detail, ghostly in its presence. And yet, the image is not painted, no brushstrokes, no pigments. It is not burned, not etched, not drawn. Under microscopic examination, the image lies only on the very topmost fibers of the cloth, so shallow it barely penetrates beyond the surface. How it came to be there remains one of the great historical enigmas. For centuries, the cloth has been revered by many as the burial shroud of Jesus. According to tradition, it was used to wrap his crucified body before burial. But even this timeline is uncertain. The first undisputed historical record of the shroud appears in the 14th century, in Liry, France. It belonged to a French knight, Geoffroy de Charny, who presented it to a local church around 1355. But where he obtained it, or how it had survived for over 300 years, if indeed it dates back that far, is unknown. In 1988, a radiocarbon test seemed to deliver a clear verdict. 3 independent laboratories dated a piece of the linen to between 1260 and 1390 AD. Case closed, many declared. A clever medieval forgery. But the story didn't end there. Critics of the carbon testing pointed to flaws in the methodology. The sample tested came from a corner of the cloth that had likely been subject to repairs, possibly using cotton interwoven with the original flax fibers after fire damage in 1532. If the tested section was from a patched area, then the dating could be entirely inaccurate. Subsequent studies have introduced more complexity. Pollen grains found on the cloth appear to originate not just from Europe, but from the Middle East, specifically the region of modern-day Palestine. Textile experts have noted that the weaving pattern of the shroud, a herringbone twill, was consistent with fabrics known in the 1st century, though not exclusive to that era. Then there's the image itself. In 1898, Italian photographer Secondo Pia took the first official photograph of the shroud. When he developed the negative, what emerged shocked the world. The negative revealed a positive image, clearer, more detailed, more human than what was visible on the cloth with the naked eye. It was as if the shroud had been made for photography long before photography existed. Since then, modern imaging techniques have only deepened the mystery. Three-dimensional information is encoded in the image, something no known artist of the medieval period could have produced. Could it be a miraculous imprint, created at the moment of resurrection, as some believers claim? Could a burst of radiation or energy somehow have seared the image into the fibers, leaving behind not paint, but a ghostly chemical signature? Or was it a work of art, an incredibly sophisticated hoax crafted to inspire awe and devotion? Some researchers suggest it may have been created using early photographic techniques, centuries ahead of their time. Theories have proposed everything from Leonardo da Vinci's genius to alchemical knowledge lost to history. Others point to medieval relic-making practices where the creation of powerful religious objects was not necessarily viewed as deceit, but as a tool for cultivating faith. And yet, no one can explain how the image was made. Despite decades of testing, chemical, physical, and spectral, there remains no consensus. One of the most striking features of the shroud is its anatomical accuracy. Bloodstains appear to follow the flow of gravity as they would on a three-dimensional body. The wounds match the pattern of Roman crucifixion, a brutal method of execution practiced widely in the 1st century. The scourge marks align with a Roman flagrum, a type of whip with multiple weighted strands. Even the placement of the nail wounds, in the wrists rather than the palms, corresponds with modern forensic understanding of how bodies were affixed to crosses. Could a medieval artist have known such details? And then there's the deeper question, why? If it is a forgery, who created it, and for what purpose? If it's genuine, how did it survive wars, fires, and centuries of political turmoil? If it is something else entirely, some unknown phenomenon, then what does it tell us about the intersection of faith, science, and the human need for wonder? The Shroud of Turin remains, at its core, a paradox. Science continues to probe its secrets, theology continues to interpret its meaning, and somewhere in between, caught in the gray space where belief and evidence meet, the cloth endures. For those who stand before it, gazing at the faded imprint of a man who may or may not have walked the sands of ancient Palestine, the questions come quietly but insistently. What is this relic? Who was the man it wrapped? And how, after all these centuries, does the image still speak, without a single word? Perhaps that is the most enduring mystery of all. Beneath the sun-scorched soil of South Africa's northwest province, in the quiet mining town of Ottosdal near Klerksdorp, miners digging through deep layers of Precambrian rock stumbled upon something that has puzzled scientists and mystics alike for decades. Inside these ancient geological formations, dating back nearly 3 billion years, lay smooth, spherical objects unlike anything else found in the Earth's crust. Known today as the Klerksdorp Spheres, these metallic or stone-like objects are small, ranging in size from a few millimeters to several centimeters in diameter. Many are nearly perfect spheres, some etched with parallel grooves that seem, at first glance, too precise to be natural. These spheres are not scattered across the surface but are embedded within pyrophyllite, a soft, sedimentary rock mined for industrial use. And that rock, geologists agree, is almost unimaginably old, formed when multicellular life was still in its infancy, if it had appeared at all. So how did these near-perfect objects come to exist? Are they a quirk of geological processes, shaped over eons by natural forces we barely understand? Or could they be something else entirely? Artifacts from a time long before history, hinting at the possibility of lost knowledge or even lost civilizations? Mainstream geologists offer a clear explanation. They describe the spheres as concretions, natural mineral accumulations that form over millions of years within sedimentary rock layers. Variations in pressure, mineral content, and temperature can produce unusual forms, even those with striations or symmetrical shapes. In this view, the Klerksdorp Spheres are not mysterious, only misunderstood. Just one more marvel of Earth's geological alchemy. But others are not so sure. Some of the spheres are made of a substance known as hematite or wollastonite, materials that can form naturally but whose precise, layered features and near symmetry seem to defy the irregularity typical of nature. The grooves that wrap around several of the spheres look engineered. Their balance and proportion appear intentional. How could such a thing form inside rock laid down more than 2 billion years ago? And there is more. A handful of the spheres, when examined in early studies, were claimed to rotate slowly inside sealed museum displays, without any known external cause. Though this claim has never been conclusively verified, it added fuel to an already burning fire of speculation. Some propose that these objects are remnants of advanced technology, perhaps not even of terrestrial origin. According to this view, they may have been created by a civilization that existed long before humans walked the earth, or by visitors from beyond it. Could the spheres be ancient instruments, bearings, message carriers, tools of an age lost to time? Others suggest the possibility of ooparts, out-of-place artifacts, anomalous items found in geological or archaeological contexts where they shouldn't exist, challenging our understanding of history and evolution. If the Klerksdorp Spheres are man-made or made by intelligent design in any form, their implications would be staggering. Skeptics urge caution. They remind us that nature is capable of great precision, and that what appears artificial may still be natural. They point to other spherical formations found across the globe, from Costa Rica's stone spheres to naturally occurring marbles in the Navajo sandstone of the American Southwest. Symmetry, they argue, does not imply intention. Yet the Klerksdorp Spheres remain unusually precise, and their context, inside geological layers dating back billions of years, sets them apart. Further complicating the mystery is the lack of extensive academic study. Though individual geologists have weighed in, few large-scale scientific investigations have been conducted. The spheres are scattered among collections, occasionally shown in museums, often relegated to curiosity status rather than serious inquiry. In an age where science often pursues what is profitable or politically urgent, relics like the Klerksdorp Spheres can be quietly ignored, anomalies that don't fit neatly into existing frameworks, and still, they endure. For those who have held them in hand, the weight, texture, and strangeness are undeniable. Their cold, smooth surfaces seem almost manufactured. Their form challenges expectation. Their presence in ancient rock forces questions about the story of life on Earth and what may have come before us. Are the Klerksdorp Spheres simply the byproduct of eons of mineral sedimentation shaped by nothing more than pressure and time? Or are they something else? An echo of a forgotten epic, a puzzle whose pieces remain scattered in stone? As the sun sets over the dusty plains of South Africa, where miners still dig deep into the earth, one cannot help but wonder, what else might be waiting beneath our feet? What other artifacts might lie hidden in stone, whispering of times beyond memory, quietly defying the timeline we take for granted? The Klerksdorp Spheres sit silently in their glass displays, or in drawers in museum basements, offering no answers, only questions. And perhaps in their silence they speak loudest of all. Beneath the dim lights of a European museum, behind a thick pane of glass, rests a sword that looks unremarkable at first glance. Its blade, long and double-edged, is weathered with age. The hilt, stripped of its original grip, reveals only rusted steel. But what draws the eye is not the shape, nor the craftsmanship, but a single word inlaid along its blade, in Latin script, Ulfberht T. This is no ordinary medieval weapon. It is one of over 170 similar swords found across Europe, all bearing some variant of the same name, Ulfberht. Discovered in rivers, burial sites, and battlefields from Scandinavia to Central Europe, these swords date from roughly 800 to 1000 AD. They appear in a time we associate with the Vikings, a time of iron and fire, when brutal raids and epic sagas shaped the northern world. But the mystery of the Ulfberht Swords goes far deeper than their historical setting. Because while the age of these weapons is well established, the metallurgy behind them defies expectations. At a time when most European smiths were working with brittle, impure iron, the true Ulfberht swords were made with a metal closer to what we would now call crucible steel, an alloy of such purity that it rivals modern industrial standards. The carbon content is remarkably uniform. Slag inclusions, the impurities left from smelting, are almost completely absent. This created blades that were not only sharper and stronger than their contemporaries, but more flexible, less likely to shatter in battle, and shockingly advanced for their time. How was such a weapon possible in the early Middle Ages? European smiths wouldn't begin producing high-quality steel on this level until centuries later. The technology to reach such temperatures and maintain such control over carbon content wasn't known to exist in 9th century Europe. And yet, here these swords are, silent, undeniable, and out of place. Some scholars believe the explanation may lie in trade. Perhaps the steel was imported from the Middle East or India, where crucible steel, like the famed Wootz, was known and used. Trade routes stretching across the Islamic world and even farther east did exist during this period. Could Viking or Frankish merchants have obtained this steel through distant and complex networks, bringing it back to European forges? That theory is plausible, but it raises further questions. If the steel was imported, who among the early medieval swordsmiths had the knowledge to work it, to forge such clean, balanced blades, avoiding the fractures and impurities that plagued lesser weapons? Was there a small group of elite craftsmen, trained in secret or through forgotten apprenticeships, whose skills were generations ahead of their time? Or had this knowledge been passed down from an even earlier era, now lost to history? Not all Ulfberht swords were created equal. Some are crude imitations. They bear the same inscription, or a misspelled version of it, perhaps Plush Ulfberht Plus or Plush Ulfberht Plus T, with errant letters or reversed characters. These fakes, forged from inferior steel, suggest that the Ulfberht name had become something of a brand, so desirable, so feared in battle, that lesser smiths sought to replicate the name even when they couldn't replicate the metal. But even that deepens the mystery. Who was the original Ulfberht? The name is not Norse, but Frankish, and some researchers believe it may refer to a single master swordsmith or an elite workshop working under a Christian monastic order in the Carolingian Empire. Perhaps even a line of smiths passing the name down like a sacred title. The inclusion of crosses in the inscriptions, Sulfberts, suggests religious association. But no written records mention the Ulfberht forge, and no blueprint for these swords has ever been found. Why would such sophisticated knowledge leave no trace in the historical record? More speculative theories abound. Some suggest that the knowledge came from forgotten pockets of ancient engineering, from Roman metallurgists who preserved skills lost after the empire's collapse. Others propose that a hidden lineage of master blacksmiths guarded this information, sharing it only with a chosen few across generations, before vanishing into obscurity. And then there are theories that reach even farther. That the swords are evidence not just of misplaced knowledge, but of an entirely different narrative of history. That there were once cultures or civilizations far more advanced than we imagine, their legacy reduced to scattered objects, blades, maps, stones, that contradict the official timeline. The Ulfberht Swords continue to resist simple explanations. Modern metallurgists, archaeologists, and historians have analyzed their composition, mapped their distribution, and even recreated their forging process using the most advanced techniques available. But no single theory fits every detail. They remain, in many ways, like time travelers, objects forged in an age that shouldn't have been able to make them. Swords that speak not only of war, but of secrets. As you stand before the glass that separates you from 1,000 years of silence, the question lingers. What knowledge was lost when the true makers of these swords disappeared? Was it an accident of history, or a deliberate concealment? And if one name like Ulfberht could echo so powerfully through the centuries, how many other names, and their secrets, have simply vanished? In the end, the Ulfberht swords are more than weapons. They are riddles carved in steel, testaments to a chapter of history that may never be fully written. It was unearthed not by scholars, but by chance, on a hilltop in eastern Germany near the small town of Nebra. The air there is heavy with pine and damp earth, where the Unstrut River winds quietly through forests and farmland. In 1999, 2 amateur treasure hunters, using illicit metal detectors, dug into the soil of the Mittelberg Hill and pulled from the dirt a flat, greenish disc, unlike anything they had ever seen. Roughly 12 inches in diameter and weighing just over 5 pounds, the object appeared unassuming at first, but etched and inlaid into its corroded bronze surface were gold leaf shapes, a crescent moon, a round sun or full moon, scattered stars, and 2 golden arcs along the edges. One of the clusters, 7 small dots, clearly resembled the Pleiades. This was not just art. This was knowledge, expressed in symbolic form, on a disc dated to nearly 1600 BC. Known today as the Nebra Sky Disk, this artifact is widely considered the world's oldest known concrete depiction of the cosmos. But what is most haunting about it is not just its age, it is what it seems to reveal. How did Bronze Age people possess such a precise understanding of the sky? And why was such knowledge encoded into a single, intricate object, buried for millennia? Mainstream archaeological studies tell us that the disk comes from the early Bronze Age of Central Europe, connected to the Unetish culture. This culture, spanning parts of modern-day Germany, Czechia, and Austria, was known for its metallurgy, burial mounds, and trade networks, but not until recently for astronomical sophistication. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials found alongside the disk, as well as analysis of the accompanying bronze swords and tools, place its burial between 1600 and 1560 BC. But the disk itself may be even older, passed down or used ritually for generations before it was interred. Its composition, bronze with gold and traces of tin and copper from mines in the Alpine regions, points to a widespread exchange of materials and ideas. The crescent and full circles are clear references to the moon and sun. The cluster of 7 stars aligns closely with the Pleiades, a group that held significance for agricultural societies across the ancient world. But the real intrigue lies in the gold arcs on the disk's edge. They span roughly 82 degrees, the angle between the solstices at that latitude. This suggests that whoever crafted the disk understood not only the yearly movement of the sun, but also the concept of horizon astronomy, tracking celestial bodies as they rise and set across the landscape. Did the makers use this disk as a ritual calendar, a teaching tool, a symbolic map of the heavens? Some scholars suggest it may have been used to synchronize the solar and lunar calendars, complex calculations requiring observations over many years. Others propose that the disk was a ceremonial object, perhaps held by a priest or sky watcher, whose role has long since vanished from the record. Still others point to the discovery of a large circular enclosure nearby, thought to be an ancient observatory, suggesting that Mittelberg Hill was once a sacred site of astronomical importance. But there are layers of mystery that defy even these informed speculations. The golden arcs were added after the initial design, implying a multi-stage creation process, or perhaps even a shift in cosmological understanding over time. A third arc, now missing but presumed to have once adorned the bottom of the disk, may have represented a boat linking the sun's journey across the sky with ancient solar mythology, echoes of which we see in Egyptian and Mesopotamian thought. How did such symbolic continuity exist between cultures so distant in both geography and worldview? Did a broader web of mythological knowledge once thread through the ancient world, lost now to the silence of time? And then there are the more speculative theories. Some researchers propose that the Nebra Disk is not simply a regional artifact, but a fragment of an advanced pre-Celtic cosmology, one shared by seafaring cultures or even a forgotten priesthood of astronomers who moved between ancient centers of knowledge. Others suggest that the disk's precision hints at inherited knowledge, remnants of even older, perhaps Neolithic, astronomical traditions that were never recorded in writing, but lived on in objects, rituals, and oral teachings. More fringe voices entertain bolder ideas, that the disk is evidence of contact with civilizations far beyond Europe, perhaps the Minoans, the Hittites, or even earlier cultures lost to the sands of time. Some ask whether it points to a forgotten epoch of human history, where advanced celestial knowledge was known, used, and then lost, buried, like the disk itself, beneath centuries of soil and war. Yet no written text accompanies the disk, no definitive manual, no carved tablet, no myth passed down to explain its function or meaning. It exists in isolation, enigmatic, beautiful, and strangely deliberate. Was it buried as an offering, hidden to protect its knowledge, or simply discarded after its symbolic value had waned? Today, the Nebra Sky Disk sits in a secure display in a museum in Germany. It no longer reflects the rising sun through golden arcs or guides the planting seasons of ancient farmers, but its silence remains potent. It is a bronze whisper from the past, a coded message from a people who watched the skies and saw more than just stars. They saw patterns, movement, meaning, and for reasons we still do not fully understand, they chose to preserve that vision in metal and gold. Who were these early astronomers? What else did they know that we have since forgotten? And if a single artifact like the Nebra Disk could hold such complexity, how many more pieces of ancient knowledge lie still buried, waiting, as it once did, for a hand to uncover them? The mystery endures, not in what we can see on the surface, but in what the disk refuses to tell. Tucked away in the hushed corridors of the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm lies a book that seems to defy time, reason, and belief. Bound in aged leather and reinforced with ornate iron, it rests beneath controlled lights and temperature, far from the daylight it once knew. At nearly 3 feet long and weighing over 160 pounds, it is no ordinary manuscript. It is massive, almost architectural in its presence, a monolith in parchment. This is the Codex Gigas, Latin for giant book. But among those who study its enigmatic pages, it is often called something far more unsettling: the Devil's Bible. Created in the early 13th century, likely within the walls of a Benedictine monastery in what is now the Czech Republic, the Codex Gigas contains an entire universe of knowledge. Within its 310 oversized pages are the complete Vulgate Bible, medical treatises, historical chronicles, magical formulas, exorcism rituals, calendars, necrologies, and cosmologies. But what captures attention and unease is a single haunting image. Filling an entire page, isolated and staring outward, is a full-color illustration of the devil. Not a metaphorical symbol, but a physical being, clawed, horned, crouching against a stark, unnatural background of darkness. Unlike the angels and saints common in illuminated texts of the time, this figure stands alone, with wide red eyes and an expression that some have described as smug, others as sorrowful. It is unsettling in its directness, as though not part of the book, but watching from within it. Why would a monk, sworn to God, devote so much time to creating such a vivid portrait of the enemy of all that is holy? According to legend, the answer is as unholy as the image itself. It is said that the Codex Gigas was created in a single night by a monk who had been condemned to be walled up alive for breaking his sacred vows. In desperation, he pleaded for a chance to redeem himself by creating a book that would glorify the monastery for all eternity. As the hours slipped away and the task proved impossible, he allegedly invoked a forbidden force, offering his soul to the devil in exchange for help completing the manuscript. By morning, the book was finished. Of course, this tale is unprovable, and most scholars consider it folklore, perhaps invented centuries later to explain the sheer magnitude of the text. Yet the facts, too, are strange. Paleographic analysis has shown that the entire manuscript, over 160,000 words, was written by a single scribe. The handwriting is remarkably consistent, without noticeable variation, as though the writer's hand never aged or changed, despite what would likely have taken decades of effort. Even more puzzling, there are no corrections, no revisions, no signs of hesitation. Only clean, methodical script from beginning to end. How could a single monk in a time before electricity, using only quills and handmade ink, produce such a volume without error? Was it done slowly, over a lifetime, or was it produced in secrecy, guided by something beyond human comprehension? The materials used are equally mysterious. The parchment is believed to be made from the skins of approximately 160 animals, most likely donkeys. No records exist detailing such a massive commission. And yet the book contains a level of intricacy and care that suggests not haste, but solemn intent. Throughout its long life, the Codex Gigas has traveled a winding path through royal courts, looted war libraries, and hidden vaults. It survived the 30 Years' War, looted by Swedish forces from Prague in 1648 as war spoils during the sack of the city's royal library. For centuries, it passed from scholar to scholar, monarch to monarch, each baffled not just by the content, but by the aura that seems to surround it. Its pages include medical instructions and cures, yet some are based on humors and methods no longer understood. Its chronicles recount biblical history alongside local events, blurring the line between sacred text and medieval memory. Even its spells and incantations, though written in a scholarly tone, carry with them a shadow of something darker. Rituals for protection, for exorcism, for invoking divine power. Or perhaps something else. Why was such a compendium necessary? Was it simply the ultimate collection of a monk's devotion to knowledge and scripture? Or was it meant to preserve something more? Some have speculated that the Codex Gigas was intended as a kind of spiritual fortress, a single volume containing everything needed to navigate the moral and metaphysical dangers of a corrupt world. Others wonder whether its true purpose was hidden in plain sight, encoded not in its content, but in its symbolism. The positioning of the devil's image, directly opposite a page depicting the heavenly city, has led some to argue that the book was structured as a mirror of duality. Heaven on one side, hell on the other. An internal battle rendered in ink and hide. What was the author trying to warn us about, or invite us to consider? To this day, the Codex Gigas has not yielded all its secrets. No one knows for certain who wrote it, how long it took, or whether its creation followed natural or supernatural rules. Linguists and cryptographers have scoured its pages for hidden codes, but none have been confirmed. Some claim that a secret chapter is missing, torn out deliberately. Others believe the book exerts a psychological weight, a sense of presence that lingers even after the pages are closed. Is this simply the power of suggestion, shaped by centuries of rumor? Or is there something inherent to the Codex, some frequency of mystery, that touches something deeper in us? Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Codex Gigas is not its legend, nor even its image of the devil, but its silence. It does not explain itself. It does not justify its contents or name its creator. It simply exists, towering and mute, as if daring us to understand what cannot be spoken. And so, the questions remain. Who truly wrote the Codex Gigas? Was it a gift to God, or something else entirely? And what truths, buried beneath layers of ink and myth, might still be waiting to be found within its pages? The answers, if they exist, are still sealed in silence. Tucked away in the archives of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, far from public view, rests a modest-looking book, its worn brown cover betraying nothing of the storm of mystery it has stirred among historians, linguists, and cryptographers. It is neither gilded nor lavishly illustrated like other medieval manuscripts. At first glance, it seems ordinary. But this is the Rohonc Codex, a book that defies interpretation, defies origin, and, some would say, defies logic itself. The manuscript spans over 400 pages, each one filled edge to edge with a strange, looping script, utterly unknown. The symbols resemble no known alphabet, no Latin, Greek, or Arabic script. There are over 800 distinct characters in the text, far more than any phonetic writing system typically contains. This alone poses a daunting question. Is the Codex a language, a cipher, or a complete fabrication? What makes it even more curious is that the manuscript is not entirely text. Interspersed throughout are illustrations, dozens of them, rendered in an archaic, almost childlike style. They depict scenes of battles, crucifixions, temples, and figures dressed in a mix of Eastern and Western clothing. Some wear what appear to be Roman-style tunics. Others carry what look like medieval European swords. There are churches, mosques, and even symbols resembling the cross and crescent side by side. But what is the Rohonc Codex trying to tell us? Its known history begins in the early 19th century, when it appeared in the private library of Count Gustav Batthyány, a Hungarian nobleman. It was later donated to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences in 1838. Before that, there is no record of its existence. No scribe's name, no date, no place of origin. From the beginning, scholars were intrigued and baffled. The text reads from right to left, the opposite of most European languages, and yet the script bears no resemblance to any Semitic writing system. Attempts to link it to ancient Hungarian, Old Turkic, early Romanian, or Sanskrit have all failed. Its grammar, if it has any, is elusive. Even more puzzling is the structure. Certain patterns repeat as if forming phrases or sentences, but there is no consistent alignment with any known linguistic rules. The symbols seem intentional yet inscrutable. Over the years, various researchers have proposed that the Codex might be a sophisticated cipher masking an underlying language, a forgotten regional dialect transcribed in a now extinct script, a religious or philosophical treatise intended for a secretive community, or perhaps a hoax, a 19th century forgery designed to mock academia or stir nationalist sentiment. And yet, none of these theories have been proven. One 20th century researcher, Ferenc Jos, claimed the Codex could be deciphered using early Hungarian, asserting it was a Christian manuscript from the time of the Avars, a nomadic people who ruled over parts of the Carpathian Basin in the early medieval period. His work was dismissed by many as overly interpretive, relying more on conjecture than hard analysis. Another researcher, Attila Neri suggested that the text was written in a form of Sumerian or Proto-Indo-European, yet this too fell apart under scrutiny, as it required dozens of assumptions about how ancient scripts were encoded and ignored the possibility that the codex might not contain linguistic content at all. Still, the images remain. In one illustration, a man is shown being crucified upside down, a motif not common in traditional Christian iconography. In another, warriors with crescent-emblazoned shields face off against others bearing a sun symbol. Are these allegorical, historical, or simply decorative? Could it be that the Codex represents the worldview of a now-lost people, one that merged multiple faiths, symbols, and stories into a unique synthesis? Some have speculated it could be a sacred text from a heretical sect, exiled or forgotten, blending Christianity, Islam, and pagan beliefs in a way that later centuries would have destroyed. Others imagine it as a philosophical puzzle, a metaphysical exercise meant not to be read, but contemplated. And yet another line of thought remains. What if it was never meant to be understood? There is a certain power in mystery. A book that refuses to speak clearly forces us to listen more closely. What if the Codex is less a manuscript and more a mirror, reflecting back our hopes, biases, and theories, depending on how we choose to interpret its silent pages? In modern times, cryptographers using computer models have attempted to detect patterns in the script. Some results suggest that the text may indeed contain structured information, that it is not random gibberish. But decoding it requires knowing what kind of cipher, if any, was used. And no known code-breaking method has yet cracked its secrets. Today, the Rohonc Codex remains untranslatable. It has never been conclusively linked to any historical event, language family, or cultural tradition. Its materials, paper, ink, and bindings, are consistent with medieval European practices, but offer no concrete origin. It sits there still, in a controlled archival environment, its pages quietly resisting the modern world's hunger for answers. Why would someone go to such great lengths to create a book no one could read? Was it a message meant only for a select few? A relic of a lost world that once had meaning, now silenced by time? Or is it a test, left for the future, waiting for a mind that can finally unlock its code? Until then, the Rohonc Codex remains a riddle in plain sight, a whisper from a forgotten century, asking questions no one has yet been able to answer. And so we ask again, is it language, art, or illusion? Is it truth or trickery? The answers, if they exist, remain hidden, perhaps forever, within its mysterious script. A short walk from the sun-bleached stones of Phaistos Palace, where the wind still carries the faint dust of Bronze Age ceremonies, a single clay disc rests behind glass in the Heraklion Archaeological Museum. Roughly 6 inches across and just a 1/4 inch thick, the Phaistos Disc appears modest, until you turn it in your hand and discover that every inch of its surface has been pressed with tiny symbols, spiraling inward like a secret code. Created around 1700 BC, at the height of Minoan Crete's power, the disc bears 241 tokens made up of 45 distinct signs, human figures, tools, animals, plants, and abstract shapes. Each sign was impressed into the soft clay before firing, using individual stamps, an ingenious technique that predates movable type by millennia. But ask any expert what those signs mean, and the answer will be, we don't know. Could this be a prayer, a hymn, or a ritual mantra recorded in a script now lost to time? Some scholars point to parallels with Linear A, the still undeciphered Minoan syllabary, suggesting a religious text meant only for the highest priesthood. Others read the sequence as a calendar, counting lunar cycles, agricultural seasons, or even astrological omens. The spiral arrangement itself hints at a journey, inward to the heart of a myth, outward to the promise of renewal. Yet there are puzzles at every turn. If the disc was a standard record, why has no similar artifact ever been found? No clay tablets, no pottery shards, no tablets bearing the same stamped signs, only this single, miraculous disc. And its symbols are neither carved nor painted, but pressed with uniform precision, as though the maker intended the design to be replicated. But in the centuries since its discovery in 1908, no one has uncovered a second copy. Some propose that the disc served as a game board, a cosmic board for children of the palace, or a tool for divination, with players moving tokens along the spiral path. Others see in its signs a musical notation, an echo of Minoan song lost beneath the waves of Aegean history. Fringe theories reach farther still, speculating on Atlantean roots or visitations from across the sea. Ideas that tantalize but resist proof. Dating the disc has proved remarkably straightforward. Thermoluminescence confirms its Bronze Age origin, but its context remains as elusive as its text. It was unearthed in a storage room under rubble, alongside coarse pottery and a handful of everyday tools, a far cry from the royal treasury one might expect for such an extraordinary object. Was it hidden deliberately before a catastrophe? Or simply misplaced, like a forgotten manuscript in the back of a scribe's workshop? The more we learn about the Minoans, their trade networks, their writing systems, their artistry, the more the disc stands apart. They left behind palace complexes with elaborate frescoes, lavish jewelry, and linear A archives. Yet here, in the most public of their cultural centers, was a single disc stamped with signs unlike any other. It suggests a parallel tradition of communication, one that coexisted with known scripts but served a different purpose, perhaps secret, perhaps sacred. And as with the Rohonc Codex before it, every attempt at decipherment yields more questions than answers. Statistical analyses reveal repeating patterns, clusters that hint at grammatical structure. Yet, without a bilingual key, no Rosetta Stone for Phaistos, interpretations remain educated guesses. An alleged translation in the 1950s read the disc as a dedicatory prayer to a goddess, while another in the 1970s cast it as a legal contract. Both cannot be true. In recent years, digital imaging and 3D modeling have brought fresh insights. Minute variations in stamp alignment suggest that multiple craftsmen worked on the disc, perhaps in shifts, each responsible for certain symbols. Does this imply an organized workshop with standardized tools, or a communal ritual where participants each contributed a piece of a larger chant? And then there is the very question of purpose. If the disc encodes sacred knowledge, why cast it in clay, a fragile medium prone to breakage? Why fire it at all, if not to preserve it through centuries? The disc's survival suggests value placed on longevity, yet its sole appearance in the archaeological record hints at suppression or disaster. What if the Phaistos Disc was intended as a time capsule, a deliberate cache of knowledge to be discovered by future generations? Or, conversely, a warning meant to be unreadable, its code accessible only to the initiated? The Minoans, masters of labyrinthine art and enigmatic script, may have seen the disc as a mirror, showing us not what they wished to tell us, but what they wished us to seek. Today, the Phaistos Disc remains one of archaeology's most beguiling artifacts. In a world where so much has been cataloged, classified, and translated, here stands a silent spiral of signs that refuses to yield. It reminds us that history is not a straight line from ignorance to enlightenment, but a landscape of lost voices, forgotten symbols, and half-glimpsed truths. What messages lie hidden in the pressed clay? What ceremony, what song, what lament or invocation did the disc once hold? And if one civilization could leave behind a single, unbroken thread of mystery, how many more have slipped through the sieve of time, waiting for someone patient or perhaps brave enough to unravel their secrets. In the quiet heart of Staffordshire, England, nestled within the sprawling grounds of Shugborough Hall, a weathered stone monument stands, framed by trimmed hedges and old trees that whisper in the breeze. At first glance, it appears like any other neoclassical folly, a carved relief depicting a familiar biblical scene, the shepherds of Arcadia. But beneath the pastoral image, etched into the stone in bold Roman letters, lies a code that has eluded scholars, cryptographers, and seekers for centuries. OUOSVAVVD. 10 letters, and one final, isolated character. That's all. No known cipher, no key, no obvious context. Just a string of seemingly random characters inscribed beneath a scene modeled after the 17th century painting by Nicolas Poussin. And yet, this inscription has captured imaginations across the world, whispered to conceal secrets older than the estate itself, perhaps even the location of a treasure long lost to time. The monument was commissioned sometime between 1748 and 1763 by Thomas Anson, a gentleman of means and ideas. His younger brother, Admiral George Anson, had circumnavigated the globe and returned a wealthy man, bringing tales of far-off lands and the spoils of conquest. The family, particularly Thomas, had a known fascination with secret societies, classical symbolism, and the emerging Enlightenment philosophies. Shugborough Hall itself became something more than a residence. It became a riddle. The Shepherd's Monument, as it came to be called, was inspired by Poussin's Et in Arcadia Ego, a painting long believed to contain layers of esoteric meaning. The Latin phrase, often translated as "even in Arcadia there am I," is traditionally interpreted as a memento mori, a reminder of death in paradise. But others see more cryptic implications. Some claim that Poussin, and perhaps by extension the Ansons, were part of a secret tradition, safeguarding knowledge too dangerous or too profound for the wider world. But what of the inscription itself? Over the years, countless theories have been proposed. Some believe it is an acrostic or abbreviation, hiding an English or Latin sentence whose letters correspond to names, locations, or religious phrases. One popular interpretation suggests Optimi uxoris, optimi sororis viduus amantissimus, vovit virtutibus. Best of wives, best of sisters, a most devoted widower dedicates this to your virtues. A romantic tribute, perhaps, to a lost love. Others are more skeptical. Could it simply be a prank or artistic flourish never meant to be solved? If so, it has certainly outlived its creator's intentions. And yet, it's what we don't know that draws the mind deeper. Why, for instance, was this monument so carefully constructed to echo the themes and symbolism of Renaissance and Baroque painting? Why was the relief reversed from the original orientation of the painting, as if to mirror something inverted or hidden? More provocative theories began to circulate in the 20th century. Researchers and fringe historians suggested a link between the Shugborough inscription and the fabled Knights Templar, a secretive Christian military order suppressed in the early 1300s. The theory proposes that the Ansons were keepers of a Templar legacy, using the monument as a cryptic map pointing toward hidden relics. Some even claim that the letters encode the location of the Holy Grail. Dan Brown's novel The Da Vinci Code brought this idea into mainstream consciousness, suggesting that Shugborough was part of a chain of European locations tied to ancient mysteries. The sudden global attention reignited interest, but offered no resolution. Decades of scholarship have yielded no conclusive decipherment. Curiously, Bletchley Park's World War II codebreakers, famed for breaking the German Enigma code, attempted to solve the Shugborough riddle. Even with some of the finest cryptographic minds of the era, they left it unsolved. Was it a sophisticated cipher? A false lead? or something else entirely, designed to puzzle rather than to reveal? And what of the context? The estate at Shugborough contains other symbolic structures, a replica of Hadrian's Arch, a tower with inscriptions referencing astronomy and time, even a Chinese house reflecting the Anson's global connections. Is the inscription merely one piece in a much larger puzzle, a landscape of encoded meaning? Or perhaps the monument was designed to challenge the viewer, not to give up a single hidden truth, but to remind us of the limits of knowledge and the allure of mystery. As the years pass and the stone continues to weather, the inscription remains, uncracked, unfaded, and unclaimed. We are left to wonder, was this truly a cipher left by a grieving husband? A message from a hidden brotherhood? A clever piece of Enlightenment-era art meant to stir the soul? Or is it a whisper from the past, offering a clue we have yet to understand? The letters remain motionless, carved with precision, daring us to look again, to think differently, to challenge our assumptions. OUOSVVD. 10 characters that resist the passage of time, silent, immutable, and haunting. What truth might lie behind them, waiting to be spoken aloud for the first time in centuries? Far out in the southern Pacific Ocean, nearly 2,000 miles from the coast of South America, lies one of the most isolated inhabited places on Earth, Easter Island, known to its native people as Rapa Nui. The island is windswept, with rolling grasslands, volcanic craters, and shores battered by endless waves. Towering above the landscape, the Moai statues stand silent and watchful, massive stone heads with long ears, wide noses, and solemn gazes fixed toward the horizon or the heavens. But while these monolithic figures have captured the world's imagination, they are not the only enigma hidden on this remote speck of land. Scattered among a few museums and archives, none of them on Rapa Nui itself, are wooden tablets covered in a curious, almost hypnotic script. These glyphs, carved with bone or obsidian tools in sweeping, elegant strokes, twist and curl like a language spoken by wind and waves. This is the RongoRongo script, perhaps the only written language ever developed in complete isolation in the Pacific. It is one of the most enduring linguistic mysteries of the ancient world, and to this day, no one has ever successfully deciphered it. The first documented discovery of RongoRongo came in 1864, when Eugène Hérode, a French missionary, visited the island and noted that some of the islanders possessed wooden tablets covered with strange characters. But already by then, the knowledge of how to read these symbols had been lost. Wars, colonialism, disease, slavery, and the conversion to Christianity had all but erased the oral traditions of Rapa Nui, and with them, the meaning of the glyphs. The script is unlike anything found elsewhere in the Pacific, written in a unique style called Bostraphodon. The lines are read in alternating directions, first left to right, then right to left, in a snaking pattern. The glyphs themselves are deeply stylized, featuring human figures, animals, plants, tools, and abstract symbols. Some resemble birds, others appear humanoid or geometric. There is a rhythmic repetition in the carvings, suggesting grammar, possibly poetic structure. Yet not a single tablet has been fully translated. Why did the islanders develop a script at all? In much of Polynesia, oral traditions prevailed. No other culture in the Pacific is known to have developed writing independently. This singularity raises unsettling questions. Was the RongoRongo script truly native to the islanders, or was it inspired or brought by an outside contact that history has forgotten? Some scholars suggest the script emerged after European contact, possibly mimicking the writing systems seen on ships or religious texts. But others argue that the complexity of the glyphs and the fact that they were carved in a way incompatible with Western writing tools suggest a deeper and older origin, Some believe it dates back centuries before the first European ship arrived in 1722. A few intriguing parallels have been drawn between RongoRongo and early writing systems of Mesoamerica, particularly the Olmec and Maya. Some glyphs bear a resemblance to those found in pre-Columbian inscriptions in Mexico and Guatemala. Could there have been transoceanic contact? Might sailors from the Americas, centuries before Columbus, have reached Easter Island? Most mainstream scholars reject this theory. They maintain that any resemblance is coincidental, and that RongoRongo, if it is a script at all, arose independently as a mnemonic device or sacred code. Yet there is no consensus even on that. Some believe the tablets were used in rituals or were priestly tools, perhaps for calendar keeping or genealogical records. Others suspect they were more symbolic, meant to convey not literal language but layers of mythic or spiritual meaning. And then there are the more fringe theories. That RongoRongo encodes messages from a lost civilization, perhaps even Lemuria, or Mu, one of the legendary sunken lands spoken of in the lore of ancient world catastrophes. Some even claim that the glyphs resemble astronomical charts or messages passed down from a now forgotten epoch of celestial knowledge. These ideas, while speculative, are born of the same frustration that has haunted linguists and archaeologists for over a century. No one can read the script. Of the dozens of known RongoRongo texts, only about 24 survive today, scattered in museums and private collections around the world, from St. Petersburg to Honolulu. Many are damaged, charred, or incomplete. Without a known bilingual translation, like the Rosetta Stone was for Egyptian hieroglyphs, researchers are left to analyze patterns, frequencies, and structure. Some think progress is being made.
Others believe the key died with the last Rapa Nui scribes, many of whom were lost in the 19th century, when Peruvian slavers raided the island and took away much of its population. There are no known oral traditions explaining the content of the tablets. There are no remaining elders who can remember the chants or songs that once may have accompanied the reading of the glyphs. Some accounts suggest that only certain classes, priests or scribes, were allowed to learn the script. If that's true, the disappearance of that small, educated class would have sealed the knowledge forever. Is RongoRongo a fully developed writing system? Is it proto-writing? Symbols meant to prompt recitations from memory, rather than encode exact language? Or is it something else entirely, an artifact of ritual and symbolism, never meant to be read in a conventional sense? And if it is a language, what stories does it tell? Do the glyphs record the genealogies of kings, the rise and fall of Moai building clans, songs to the gods of sun and sea, or do they speak of something older, something no longer remembered? As we gaze upon the remaining tablets, their surfaces smoothed by hands long turned to dust, we're left with more questions than answers. Each glyph feels like a whisper from a time when stone giants stood as guardians, and words were carved in sacred wood. What might still lie buried on Rapa Nui, waiting to be found? What voices might speak again, if only we could learn how to listen?
In a softly lit museum case, it sits silently, translucent, smooth, and cold to the touch. Carved entirely from a single block of clear quartz crystal, the object is both beautiful and unsettling. Its proportions are eerily lifelike, capturing every contour of a human skull in precise, gleaming detail. Light refracts through its structure in peculiar ways, casting subtle rainbows along its base and filling the surrounding space with an almost reverent glow. It is one of the infamous crystal skulls, objects that have ignited fascination, fear, and fierce debate for over a century. These skulls, made from rock crystal and ranging in size from palm-sized effigies to full-scale replicas of human heads, have been linked, accurately or not, with the ancient cultures of Central and South America. The most famous among them is the so-called Mitchell Hedges skull, named after the British adventurer F.A. Mitchell Hedges, who claimed it was discovered in the 1920s in the ruins of a lost city deep in the jungles of Belize. Its surface is polished to a mirror-like sheen. The jaw is detachable. Some say it is so intricately carved that it defies the capabilities of ancient tools. But was it really found in an ancient ruin? Or was its backstory carefully crafted to enhance its mystique? Many of the crystal skulls surfaced in Europe during the 19th century, coinciding with a period of growing interest in Mesoamerican civilizations such as the Maya and Aztecs. Dealers claimed they had unearthed them from long-lost tombs or sacred temples. Museums, including the British Museum and the Musée du Quai Branly in Paris, acquired some of these skulls, displaying them as examples of ancient craftsmanship and spiritual iconography. Yet as archaeological science advanced, cracks began to show in the narrative. Modern tests, including electron microscopy, revealed something troubling. Some of the skulls bear the telltale marks of modern rotary tools, abrasions inconsistent with the obsidian or flint tools known to the ancient civilizations of the Americas. The quartz material used in some skulls was sourced from regions in Brazil or Madagascar, areas far from where the skulls were allegedly discovered. Dating techniques proved inconclusive, but the patterns of wear and tooling pointed to the 19th century, not to a lost pre-Columbian past. So what are these skulls really? Elaborate forgeries created to satisfy the Victorian appetite for exotic antiquities? Or relics of a forgotten culture whose methods and purpose remain unknown? Mainstream archaeology leans toward the former. Scholars argue that most, if not all, of the crystal skulls were produced in the late 1800s by skilled artisans in Europe, possibly inspired by genuine Mesoamerican art, but exaggerated and reinterpreted for Western audiences. The lack of any archaeological context, no documented excavation, no verified temple discovery, further undermines their credibility. But even so, the allure of the skulls persists, and the stories surrounding them have only grown more layered and enigmatic with time. Some claim the skulls possess strange properties, that they emit faint hums when held, that people in their presence experience visions or even momentary lapses in time. Others believe the skulls serve as cosmic repositories of knowledge, encoded with messages from ancient civilizations or even extraterrestrial visitors. According to one popular legend, there are 13 original crystal skulls scattered across the Earth, and when united, they will reveal secrets critical to humanity's survival. This idea has been dismissed by scientists and historians alike, yet it remains deeply embedded in esoteric circles. The number 13 holds symbolic weight in many cultures, including the Maya, whose calendar system included 13 heavens and 13 divine energies. Is it coincidence that this number appears in the skull legends? Or is there a deeper cultural thread running through the story, one forgotten in the wake of colonization and conquest? There are also indigenous perspectives to consider. While mainstream archaeology has found no pre-Columbian references to crystal skulls, some modern-day Maya spiritual leaders and shamans regard them as powerful ceremonial objects, regardless of their physical origins. For them, the skulls are less about archaeology and more about energy, tools of meditation, healing, or prophecy. In these traditions, the skull represents not just death, but consciousness, transformation, continuity. Could the myths that have grown around these skulls reflect something older than the objects themselves? An echo of knowledge lost, reinterpreted through modern fascination? The crystal itself adds another layer to the puzzle. Quartz is piezoelectric, capable of converting mechanical pressure into an electrical charge. It is used in modern technology to regulate frequencies, store data, and guide signals. Could ancient cultures have been aware, on some level, of these energetic properties? Or is it simply modern minds projecting technological ideas onto ancient symbols? And then there is the question of precision. Even if carved in the 19th century, some skulls demonstrate levels of craftsmanship that seem beyond what was expected of the time. The Mitchell Hedges skull, for instance, shows no signs of machine carving, according to some early examinations, though subsequent studies challenge that assessment. Could it have been shaped over decades by hand, slowly polished with sand and patience? Or might it be the work of an unrecognized genius, one who deliberately obscured its origin? Each explanation raises more questions than it answers. Fraud, faith, science, spirit. The crystal skulls exist at the uneasy intersection of all of them. They are objects suspended between what we know and what we sense, between verified history and the stories we still long to believe. They continue to travel, from museums to private collectors, from documentaries to rituals, silent, reflective, enigmatic. If they are hoaxes, why do they still resonate so deeply? And if they are real, in some way that transcends tool marks and provenance, what truths might they be holding, just beneath the surface? Somewhere, scattered across vaults and temples, collections and deserts, the crystal skulls remain, glistening like frozen time, their expressions empty and eternal. What are they waiting for us to understand? In a quiet library corner, behind thick glass and beneath dimmed lights, lies a book unlike any other, a tome that invites the eye but defies understanding. Its cover is bound in white, almost sterile in appearance, adorned only with enigmatic script and the strange flourish of colors that seem to spill out from another world entirely. This is the Codex Seraphinianus, a work that challenges the boundaries of language, art, and reality itself. Open it, and you're drawn into a universe that is both dazzling and disorienting. Page after page reveals vibrant, intricately detailed illustrations of surreal cities shaped like organisms, of bizarre, dreamlike creatures, and of human-like figures performing rituals or actions that feel familiar yet entirely alien. An elephant with the legs of a fish, a tree that gives birth to furniture, couples transforming into alligators mid-embrace. Every image is meticulously rendered, giving the impression of coherence, of internal logic, even though no rational explanation seems to apply. Accompanying these illustrations is a flowing script, elegant, consistent, but utterly undeciphered. The language of the Codex does not correspond to any known alphabet. Its letters are beautiful, looping, almost organic in nature, but they hold no linguistic anchor, no translation key, no Rosetta Stone, and unlike the ancient symbols of cuneiform or hieroglyphs, which hint at phonetics or pictorial meaning, the Codex's text seems deliberately unknowable. It mirrors language, but offers no foothold in comprehension. The Codex Seraphinianus was created by one man, Luigi Serafini, an Italian architect and industrial designer. He began the project in the late 1970s and published the first edition in 1981. In interviews, Serafini has explained that he wanted to evoke in adults the feeling a child experiences when looking at books they cannot yet read, captivated by imagery, mystified by text. According to him, the Codex is a visual language meant to provoke curiosity, not communication, a linguistic illusion. But is that all it is? The art world has praised the Codex as a masterwork of imagination. Scholars see it as a modern surrealist monument, a symbolic mirror of the human desire to find meaning even where none may exist. Yet others are not so convinced that Serafini's explanation tells the whole story. Why construct an entire alphabet, painstakingly uniform, page after page, if its meaning is void? Could there be structure hidden beneath the aesthetic? Patterns waiting to be uncovered? Some linguists have speculated that the codex might employ a cipher or be based on a lost language. Attempts have been made to identify recurring symbols and word structures, frequencies, groupings, syntax, but decades on, no one has managed to decode a single sentence. Unlike the Voynich manuscript, another mysterious book written in an undeciphered script, there is no indication that the codex's writing corresponds to phonetic sound or semantic content. It might be entirely invented, or it might not. There are also peculiar features in the book's organization. It is divided into thematic sections, not unlike a traditional encyclopedia. One section details the flora and fauna of this surreal world. Another explores its physics and machinery. Others seem to delve into cultural practices, language, food, and games. The structure suggests knowledge, yet the content continually slips through the fingers of interpretation. Why does it feel so structured, so intentional, if it is meant to be nonsense? The illustrations further complicate things. Some scholars have noted parallels between the codex's imagery and Renaissance marginalia, alchemical manuscripts, and even the illuminated texts of medieval monks. Could Seraphini have been channeling archetypes, universal motifs buried deep in the collective human psyche? Or are these images drawn from dreams, altered states, or visions? There is even speculation, whispered mostly in fringe circles, that the Codex is a form of channeled work, created not entirely from Seraphini's conscious mind, but as a vessel for something older or other, a received language perhaps, or a map of an alternate reality. It's a notion dismissed by academics, but it persists nonetheless. And then there are the eerie resonances with other enigmatic texts, the Voynich manuscript, the Rohonc Codex, even the undeciphered RongoRongo glyphs of Easter Island. Each one a document of mystery, created with intense care, but without context or key. Could the Codex Seraphinianus be a modern echo of an older hidden tradition? A continuation of a lineage of knowledge passed silently across centuries? Or is it, as Seraphini suggests, simply a beautiful deception? An exercise in pure creativity, liberated from meaning. One thing is clear: it evokes deeply. Readers often describe the sensation of reading the Codex as unsettling, like looking into a world that is just barely out of reach, a dream you can't quite remember, a language you almost understand, and this emotional resonance, this echo of forgotten meaning, is perhaps the most chilling part. That a book written in a language no one can read, filled with images from no known world, can still move us, still haunt us, still whisper in ways we can't explain. Is the Codex Seraphinianus a masterpiece of imagination, a puzzle with no solution? Or could it be both, a mirror showing us not just a strange world, but the limits of our own perception? We turn the pages, one after another, searching, wondering. And as we close the book, its silence lingers, not empty, but full of questions. What if we've only just begun to learn how to read it?